Welcome. I feel like Mr. Rogers. Come on in. Come on in. No, thank you for attending today. This has been a big journey for me. Everywhere I go, I think I see analytics as the next thing and something that fascinates me. I also see, though, executives that say they need analytics, but they don't know how to use them and get the value from them. So we're going to help with that today. We're going to provide some expert commentary from the people working in analytics on the front lines. We're going to hear pre-recorded analytic case studies, but we're going to have these prepared by experts in the field and followed by 10 minutes of live Q&A with each presenter. Your questions and input to identify the best practices involved are crucial. So please remember, there are no bad questions. If you're wondering about it, someone else in the audience is likely thinking about it as well. We're going to hear about trends, things not to do, and don't worry, we're going to enjoy one of our famous ITWC quizzes, today sponsored by Citrix. To wrap up the day and hopefully bring the threads of this together from all the case study learnings, we're going to hold a special 35-minute live workshop. And that's what I said, live workshop. So as we approach the show's end, you're going to be invited to participate in this camera-on session with our guest speaker and noted measurement expert, Doug Hubbard, and me. And we're going to give you a task to complete. We'll get your feedback. More about that later. Today's 3-hour conference and workshop is made possible by the sponsorship of SAP, Citrix, and Corvell Consulting. We couldn't do this without them. We also enjoy the support of the CIO Association of Canada, the Canadian Information Processing Society, KIPS, and Data for Good. Don't forget, use that hashtag Analytics Unleashed on social media to share the insights that you have with a wider audience. Now, we're going to hear from our keynote speaker, Doug Hubbard, in just a minute, but I want to make sure that you, the audience, know how to get the best from today's event. So, if you've been to one of these before, you know what I'm going to do, but if you haven't, right now I'm speaking to you what we call the Jumbotron. That's the main viewing screen. Now, to my left, or just underneath me on some devices, you'll see a live chat box. You can chat with the other attendees there. Be sure to enter your name and check the terms and conditions on the box, and then you can participate. Why don't you do that right now, as a matter of fact? Why don't you do that and tell us where you're tuning in from. I want to see how wide our audience is. So just go in there, click on that, accept the conditions, and tell us where you're coming from in there. Now, if you also scroll down, there are lots of other things on the platform you should check out. There's interesting downloads, there's a 50% off coupon for the next Corvell Consulting session on data analytics for business delivered by Yogi Schultz. After you see Yogi's session, you'll know why this is so important. Now, there's also a messenger box that will show up through the show, and it'll provide interesting facts. It'll also provide directions on how to participate in the workshop, so watch for that. That's it. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Peter Harborough, the Director of the Center of Excellence Platform and Technologies with SAP. Peter will introduce our guest speaker, Doug Hubbard. Now, Peter's been with SAP for 18 years and held positions ranging from Senior Partner Manager OEM to Director of Database Sales. He's been in his current role as Business Architect since 2016. Peter, will you do the honors?
Okay, thank you, Jim. SAP is proud to be a sponsor of this event. One thing that I've learned in business and in life is that it's full of surprises. Things can be going along great, and then you can be faced with a situation, perhaps at a customer. There's a spike in costs, there's an equipment failure, there's a system that's not working. When we look at this, the event maybe looks random. But then when we look at it, and especially looking at it in hindsight, there's usually signs that have been missed. So maybe they're imperceptible at the time, but if we were looking at the right pieces of information and measuring their impact, we would have been able to blunt the impact of that event or perhaps avoid it altogether. So there's a sea of data and information here that is available to organizations. So how do we pick the signals from the noise and know what information to focus on? How can we measure something more intangible like innovation to know that you're keeping ahead of the competition? So the answers lie in predictive analytics, our focus today. Later today, my colleague Steve Bickerton, an analytics expert here at SAP, will be talking about predictive analytics as one of the hot trends organizations need to keep an eye on. Steve will explain how this works and why you don't need a data scientist to see its value in everything from financial forecasting to preventative maintenance to optimizing a product's selling price or scheduling production for high yield and minimal waste. But right now, it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker who is going to talk about how to measure anything. Doug Hubbard is a recognized measurement expert and much sought after public speaker. He is a prolific author, and as a consultant through Hubbard Decision Research, he offers risk modeling, management, and quantitative decision analytics using his own applied information economics, or AIE framework. Mr. Hubbard's specialty is helping organizations measure intangibles like customer satisfaction, organizational flexibility, technology risk, and technology return on investment. It turns out that people are generally not very good at measuring this type of thing unaided. Mr. Hubbard can provide the tools and methodology to help managers make less risky decisions and gain the insights from their data that will allow them to succeed. Mr. Hubbard tells us that when we seek metrics to solve problems, we're really trying to know something better than we know it now, which is a good thing and a great start for organizations. Mr. Doug Hubbard will offer a 20-minute address now to kick off the conference, and then he'll be back at the end of today for a 40-minute live workshop where he'll take questions about how you can measure the value of analytics. So please join me in giving a virtual round of applause for Mr. Doug Hubbard. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Doug Hubbard, and this is How to Measure Anything, Finding the Value of Intangibles in Business. It's an introduction to why nothing is truly immeasurable. Everything that you ever thought was immeasurable actually was measurable. Now, you've probably heard or said some of these things in regards to a measurement. Maybe you've heard somebody say, we don't have sufficient data to measure that. Or maybe you've heard them say, this is too complex to measure. This decision is too complex. Or we can't really use historical analysis because every situation is unique. And how do we measure this when so many things affect it? Or how do we know we have all the variables? Well, in each of those cases, the implied alternative is, therefore, we're better off relying on our experience. Your experience is still just a model. You're modeling it anyway. The question is never whether to model. It is which modeling method is measurably less wrong. And we'll talk about why measurement doesn't necessarily mean perfection either. Let's talk about that first objection here. We don't have sufficient data. That's actually a very specific mathematical claim. When someone says they don't have sufficient data to measure something, did they do the math? Did they actually compute the uncertainty reduction they would get from a given amount of data, and they computed the economic value of that uncertainty reduction to determine whether or not that effort was justified? They're probably winging it. And this is what happens a lot when people object to various measurements. They're vaguely recalling some things they thought they learned in statistics in college, perhaps, but they're not quite getting it right. I'm going to talk about 3 reasons why anything ever seemed immeasurable and why they're all 3 misconceptions. I call them concept, object, and method, or .com if you want a mnemonic to remember them by. Concept has to do with the definition of measurement itself. It may not mean what you think it means. The object of measurement is defining the thing that you're trying to measure, understanding what it is, taking the ambiguity out of it. And finally, the methods of measurement. How do random samples work? How does statistical inference actually work, or controlled experiments? So let me address the concept of measurement first. This is key. For the better part of a century now, measurement did not mean an exact point. It's not a point value. The de facto use of the term measurement in the scientific community is a quantitatively expressed reduction in uncertainty based on observation. In other words, you start with a lot of uncertainty about some quantity you're interested in. You make some observations, do some trivial math, and then you have less uncertainty than you had before. Now, not only is that the de facto use of the term in the empirical sciences, it's the most practical use of the term for decision makers. So let's build on that a little bit. This whole approach of thinking of measurement as a reduction in uncertainty sort of implies that you needed to have an uncertainty to start with, which is the case here. So how do we start to quantify our current uncertainty prior to a measurement? There's actually been a lot of interesting work on this over the decades. It turns out that people can be trained to subjectively assess probabilities, and they can be trained to be pretty good at it. And here's what I mean by that. If I were to track all the times you said you were 80% confident, let's say for events that would happen by the end of 2020, and then I look back at the end of 2020 and I count up all the events that happened or didn't. Of all the times you said you were 80% confident, did about 80% come true? Of all the times you said you were 95% confident, did about 95% of those come true? If I tracked a large number of those forecasts where you're putting probabilities of anywhere from 50% up to 100% on things that you're assessing to be true or false, right? So if you had no idea, it wouldn't matter whether you said true or false. You would be indifferent between true or false. You'd say 50%. That's your most uncertain if you're saying that something's true or false about some particular forecast. And if you're absolutely certain, you would say you're 100% confident. Well, over a large number of trials, if you're perfectly calibrated, you'd be right along this solid green line on this diagonal on this chart. We're comparing your assessed chance of being correct to the observed frequency of correct. Now, we've actually trained over 2,000 people in the last 22 years to be very good at subjectively assessing probabilities. And what we observe is when we give them their first exercise, the first test, the benchmark where they assess their uncertainty, people are systematically overconfident. This is consistent with all of the other research in decision psychology. People tend to put too high a probability on being right. They're not right 90% of the time when they say they're 90% confident. Even when they say they're 100% confident, they're wrong more than 10% of the time. When they say they're 90% confident, they have about a 75% chance of being right. But we also observe that after calibration, they can get very close to the ideal calibration line, in fact, almost entirely within the statistically allowable error for this size of this population that we're looking at. We've also observed that this training, which could be on just trivia questions, actually does improve people's performance on their real world estimates for things like project cost and the probability of winning some big contract or what next quarter's revenue is going to be, or how long some R&D project will take before you can go to market. All of these are real world estimates that people are routinely asked to provide. Usually, not always actually, but what we do is we gather that information in a probabilistic form. If they don't know a number exactly, they don't say it's going to take exactly 18 months, they give us a 90% confidence interval. It'll take anywhere from 12 months to 20 months. And if they don't know for a fact that a competitor won't come out with a product earlier, they say, well, I'm 80% confident that we'll come out with it first. You're not 100% confident. So you can be trained to do that. We can also combine those estimates. This is still on the topic of quantifying your current state of uncertainty. Often you have to combine multiple experts when you're estimating something. There are ways to do that. And you don't just average everybody, even though that turns out to be kind of common. In fact, one of the more common methods is you get everybody in a room and they all agree on it. That might actually be the worst method, it turns out, for aggregating multiple estimates from different subject matter experts. But there are algorithms for doing it. And what's interesting is that the best algorithms are measurably better than your best individual expert over a large number of trials. This is fascinating. What do we do with these probabilistic estimates? We can't put them in conventional, traditional spreadsheets for a cash flow where we compute a net present value. In fact, what we do is we run a Monte Carlo simulation. This is a way we can do the math when you don't have exact numbers. And there's been some interesting research that shows that people who build Monte Carlo simulations appear to be better at forecasting. This appears to work because you're allowed to decompose your sources of uncertainty. And this is what Monte Carlos do for us. We decompose our sources of uncertainty. We don't know all of the inputs for the benefits or the risk of a new project. We put ranges and probabilities on them. And so we're going to get a range of potential net present values or ROIs. And we'll see that sometimes we lose money. And we can put a probability on that. If we see that out of 10,000 trials, there were 2,000 times we lost money on some investment, that's about a 20% chance of losing money. Now, there's a lot of ways that we can measure something, and there's a lot of very difficult sounding measurements. So I've talked about the concept of measurement, what measurement means, including how to set up the initial prior probability, your current state of uncertainty, so that we can reduce it further with observations. But we also want to talk about this object of measurement. This is important because a lot of very difficult sounding measurements are actually just a problem in how we define the thing that we're measuring. How do I measure teamwork? How do I measure strategic flexibility or quality or cybersecurity risk or the value of training? These are all things that we've heard. Innovation. How would I measure that? Collaboration. Each of these items are things that people have tried to measure, but they run into a wall, an obstacle, because they have a hard time even defining it. So I like to propose a few questions that helps them figure out what it is. First, what do you see when you see more of it? Have you observed that some individuals or teams are more innovative than other individuals or teams? Do you observe that some of them collaborate more? Or that some projects are more relevant for strategic alignment than others? What did you see when you saw variations in this? Almost anything you ever think of measurement is something you've seen real world variations of. Otherwise, you might not have even thought of the need to measure it. You think it varies, therefore you want to measure it. So what did you see when it varied? Identify some observable consequences. Once you figure out how you observe something, you're halfway to measuring it. The rest is trivial math. I also like to ask people why they care about measuring it. Why would you care about measuring innovation? Answering that question helps us frame the problem, and it helps us figure out how we might even start to measure it in the first place. Are you interested in measuring innovation because you're worried about which team to put in charge of a particular R&D project? Are you interested in the innovativeness of a city or a geographic region because you're considering putting your laboratories there and you want to be able to hire better people? Are you interested in measuring the innovativeness of an idea or design or patent because you're really forecasting how much money you think it's going to make? What do you mean by innovativeness? So what we see when we see more of it, and then the why do you care question. Here's a few examples. How do we measure employee empowerment? Well, maybe employee empowerment really means less management overhead. Is that what you're seeing when you're seeing more employee empowerment? Maybe certain decisions are made more accurately and faster because you've empowered people at lower levels to make more decisions. How about information availability? Maybe that means the time and cost of searching is reduced, or certain costly errors in using the wrong information are less frequent, or customer relationship, increased repeat business. These are all examples of what people actually see when they see more of the thing they originally thought was intangible. And why do they want to measure those things? Well, you might want to measure employee empowerment because you're interested in investigating whether to implement a different organizational structure. Maybe you want a flatter organization and you're expecting some benefits out of that. Maybe you're calling this ambiguous group of benefits employee empowerment, but there are really a lot of separate things that you have to unpack. Likewise, for information availability, are you assessing a major investment in some new information technology, customer relationship? Are you considering a new help desk system, et cetera? Figuring out what decision you're trying to make and what you see when you see more of something helps you refine the object of measurement. Lastly, let me talk about the methods of measurement. No matter what you're measuring, assume the following until you prove otherwise. You have more data than you think. This is all about being resourceful. Don't give up so quickly, believing that you don't have data to measure something. You need less data than you think. When people do the math, they're routinely surprised at what kinds of inferences they can make from even a few observations. And finally, there's a good chance it's been measured before. I don't think that people in business nearly often enough take advantage of the fact that there's so much research on virtually any topic that's available right on the internet. All right. And I'm talking about published research, not just people's blogs. I'm talking about published peer reviewed research with actual statistics behind it. When I talk about the methods of measurement, sometimes it's useful to just think about the variety of things that are routinely measured that might at first glance seem virtually impossible to measure. How did the Allies in World War II estimate the German tank production levels by month by a statistical analysis of the serial numbers of captured tanks? Not obvious, but possible. How does a marine biologist estimate the population of fish in a lake without draining the lake? Well, it's a random sampling method, but it's not an obvious random sampling method. It's catch-recatch is the name of that sampling method. My point is there's a lot of interesting techniques for measuring things that once you know they exist, you realize a lot more things are measurable than you might otherwise think. In fact, there's been some research on this. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky did some research on this. Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2002, I believe it was, in economics, even though he said he never took an econ course in his life. And their research showed that people have strong intuitions about random samples that are wrong in fundamental respects. And this affects a lot of people's intuitions about what is measurable and not measurable, simply because their intuitions are incorrect about what samples can tell us. Here's one way to think about measurement. Imagine I made a chart where the horizontal axis represents my certainty in some quantity. So I have an uncertain quantity like the duration of a project or what next month's sales will be or something like this. And I can make some measurements. And as I take more and more measurements, I reduce my uncertainty about that quantity. As I go further right, I have less and less uncertainty, more certainty. My vertical axis is a measure of value or cost. It's a monetary measure. I've got two curves I want to plot here. One is the expected cost of information, or ECI. The expected cost of information rises slowly at first, but as I want to gain more and more certainty and get rid of that last little bit of error, the cost goes up quite a lot. Because getting rid of that last little bit of error, you approach, in some cases, infinite cost to get rid of that last little bit of error, if it were even possible, okay? There's another curve. The expected value of information, or EVI. That rises quickly at first, but it levels off. It can't do better than perfect information. There's a finite limit to the value of information, no matter how much you get. So it has to level off. The shapes of these two curves, and you can work these out on an individual basis for individual parameters, you can find out that the biggest bang for the buck in a measurement tends to be early. That's what's interesting about this. A lot of times people might assume that if you have a lot of uncertainty about some quantity, you need a lot of data to measure it. In fact, just the opposite is true. The more uncertainty you have, the bigger uncertainty reduction you get from the first few observations. In fact, if you know almost nothing, almost anything will tell you something. That's the way to think about the math. Now, there actually is a way to compute that value on a variable by variable basis within large decision models. And we've been doing this for years. We've done lots of decision models, more than a couple of hundred, each of them having dozens or even a couple of hundred variables each. And we will find that some of the variables have very high information values and some have very low information values. That's not too surprising. But what I think is surprising is that the variables with the high information values are not what people would have guessed. People tend to spend their time measuring things that are statistically less likely to actually improve decisions. In the case of IT projects, they spend more time measuring cost than benefits, even though they're more uncertain about benefits. Within cost, they spend more time measuring initial development costs and less time measuring long-term maintenance and training, even though they're more uncertain about the latter. We call this the measurement inversion. We've observed this in every field we've ever done analysis in, whether it's about environmental policy or military logistics or R&D in biotech or aerospace. In each of these cases, people would have spent their time measuring things statistically less likely to improve the decision until we showed them what the information values were. That took them down a completely different path. So we've put all of this together into a process. This is a pretty high-level flow chart of the process I call applied information economics. It starts with defining a decision. All of the measurement issues that you're interested in are supposed to support a decision. Now, there's other reasons why somebody might want to measure something. They might measure it because the information itself has a resale value. That's one possibility. Or you might do it out of pure entertainment. But I'm going to start with the assumption that most organizations that want to measure things are trying to support decisions under uncertainty. We then model our current state of uncertainty about that decision. We can start with a Monte Carlo simulation, which is populated with those calibrated estimates I talked about. So at least trained estimators are estimating their current state of uncertainty. Once we have that, we can compute the value of additional information on every uncertain variable in the model. Then we can measure where the information value is high. Once we've done that, we update our model, compute the value of information again. We might go through this loop a couple of times. I rarely see it more than 3 times. A couple of times is pretty common. But once you've removed the uncertainty that's economically justified to be removed, then you can optimize your decision. That's how all of that works. So I'll just summarize by asking, what is your single most important measurement? The performance of your measurement instruments for decision making. What is the performance of your measurement methods? How much do they actually improve decision making? And this includes your subject matter experts measuring their performance at estimating things, certainly measuring the performance of the empirical methods that you're using, and even the quantitative models that you're building. There's a lot more to get into on all of this, but I wanted to give you some aspirational goals, maybe a few takeaways that you can think about, like, for example, just the measurement.com concept object method, and also that you have more data than you think, need less data than you think. And it's probably been measured before, no matter what you're measuring. So take all of that into account.
Thanks, Doug. You've continued to show us how you can measure things that you never thought you could measure, like innovation and teamwork and other intangibles. I've been watching for a long time, read all your books, and very into this. But I want to challenge the audience to think about something they want to measure, but haven't found a way to do it. Now, put it in the chat, and when we meet with Doug for the workshop, we'll ask him for his advice on solving your problem. Now, speaking of problems, and similar thing, Bruce Power recently had a challenge with their data. They'd accumulated millions of records and reports that were critical to document its compliance with government regulation, but they discovered they weren't searchable in any meaningful way. Please welcome CEO Jason Cassidy and Laurie Constantine, Chief Engagement Manager, both from Shiny Docs. They'll talk about how they helped Canada's only private sector nuclear power generator solve their problem, and how Bruce Power is now all fired up about transforming their enterprise data into information with business value. The floor is yours, Jason and Laurie, but remember, audience, we'll see them again in 8 minutes, so get your great questions ready. If you'd like, you can use the chat during the presentation so we won't forget the questions. Go.
I'm joined today by Laurie Constantine. She's the Client Engagement Manager working on the Bruce Power project for the last 2 years. Welcome, Laurie.
Thanks for having me. So I started working with Bruce Power about 2 years ago. At that point, the project had started, but it was still in its early stages. They were really at the point of taking a look at what they had, what data they had to work with, and really where they wanted to go, what they wanted to build on, what they wanted to focus on, and how Shiny Docs could help support them on that journey.
So the timing couldn't be better for Bruce in that they were looking to move to Maximo from a more proprietary system. They were looking to streamline their operations. They were looking to have a place where employees would have a more ergonomic, digital, fast experience in a modern context. Could you talk about how our data understanding with respect to documents, their previous drawings, and supply chain information has helped them on that journey?
What we were able to do with Bruce Power is provide them concrete information that enabled them to act in a meaningful way. Other organizations weren't really able to step up to help them uncover their data. Their manual processes were just not able to keep pace with the speed in which work needed to be completed, how the work was being completed. Bruce is at the cusp of a digital transformation. They're growing as an organization and starting to see how technology can help support them in the future.
I find something unique about Bruce Power, the people, the culture,
Yep.
The employees, the consultants that they have are invested personally in this. And I find them to be, in a sense, more aggressive and easier to work with than a lot of other customers. Could you talk about how that's been an advantage in this digital transformation?
For sure, and that has been one of Bruce Power's biggest advantages. Their employees approach their work with a sense of openness and curiosity that just doesn't always exist in all large organizations. They've leaned into this process, and it hasn't always been easy. And sometimes we are planning as we go along, and we have to change and we have to adapt. And Bruce Power is really good at going along that journey and understanding that sometimes it is a journey, because when we started this project, we didn't have the same goals that we have now. But as we explored and we leaned in, we saw just how powerful and just how much work we could accomplish together. Their openness and curiosity has been one of the building blocks for the success of this project.
I really like that approach, because quite often when people engage with us, they'll say, I want to delete half of my data, or I want to move it all into some other system.
Yeah.
And then when you start peeling back and asking, well, what is it that you have and how are people using it? Then there's a head scratch sometimes going, well, we don't know that yet, but we'll find out as we're moving it.
Yeah.
And I think it sets organizations perhaps up for failure or delay, because they're making the decision about what to do with the data prior to actually discovering what they have, as you've suggested.
Yeah, and I don't want to minimize this work. This is not easy work. This is not flippant. This is not something you can just press delete on. It takes time to really dig in and understand what you have. And oftentimes companies are surprised. They don't realize employees or just their data is being used in a certain way. It's being stored in a certain way. And that discovery is really paramount to making informed business decisions about how you want to move forward and how you want to use this data.
So a lot of organizations out there, everybody is used to using Google on the public web. Everybody's used to using Facebook and being able to connect and find different assets or piece of information. But within their organization, if you want to find the finance information, you go to the finance system. If you go to the asset information, it's in the asset system. If you want the records, you got to go to the record system. Google has fixed that on the public web. Most organizations do not have that. That home page, the search across all of these systems that bring it together in that natural way that is permissioned and secured. Bruce Power has that now with Bruce Discovery. Could you talk a little bit about the value that's brought, and what part of their digital transformation did that drive?
Yeah, and I mean, I first want to mention, we didn't go into Bruce Power with the idea of developing discovery search. It was really through peeling back the layers, the work that we did with them, digging into their data, and starting to uncover just what was lacking was those connections. You're exactly right. The information or the resources that they use completely function as intended, but as an employee, I don't work in a vacuum. I don't do one thing. I do different things, and I touch on different systems. And really, Discovery Search came about with that idea. How do we make looking for the information that you need easier? How do we put it at your fingertips? How do we give you something that is familiar, easy, that doesn't require training, and that makes those connections for you so that you don't even think about it. You just go to your Bruce Power homepage and you search for what you're looking for, and it's right there within seconds at your fingertips.
I like that, because it really tells the story that the journey to get a good understanding of your business doesn't start with, I want to search everything.
Right.
It starts with, how do I enrich the information? How do I connect the information? And once it's enriched, findable, now you can search it. And I think that's what Google has done with the public web. It's certainly what Bruce did with their private data across these multiple powerful systems they were using?
So it's not even just knowing, it's not even just connecting your data, it's knowing how to connect the data, where those gaps are, how you can improve them, and what will be meaningful for your employees. And again, that work is not possible unless you know what you have and you know how to find it and you know how it's important and you're able to make a judgment call about what's important. And again, none of that would have been possible without the foundation work. So really, the time that we spent with Bruce Power discovering their data, uncovering their rot, and really digging in, paved the way for discovery search. It highlighted the need that maybe we wouldn't have seen without it. And really it was a partnership. The idea really came, it was a synergy of both of our ideas, of both of our organizations, identifying a gap and deciding how to move forward. It was a decision that we made as a collective. The concept of continuous improvement is ingrained at Bruce Power. They are focused on outcomes. They are always moving forward. But at the core, they want actions. They want to move forward. They want to focus on what is actionable, what I can do right now, and what I can't do right now, that will be a focus for later down the road. But it's that mindset of always growing, always looking forward, and really focusing on what is actionable has made them a success.
I like that. I think it's you think of parallels where you're trying to discover something. Like it's the ultimate might be going to the moon. Is it was not Apollo 1 or Apollo 2 or Apollo 3 that
Right.
went to the moon. Is that they weren't failures that they didn't go to the moon. It was never their intention. They wanted to learn how to do it, how to get there. And eventually they did. And without those learnings, how can you find out what you're capable of doing?
I think really something that is often missing in data understanding is that people aspect. You can talk about AI, machine learning, those things it's all great, but at the end of the day, you can't lose focus that you're working with people, and people need to come along with you, need to grow with you, and need to see the vision. And it has to be concrete, has to be actionable. And I think that is really one of the core strengths of this project is that people are at the center of it and how we can help people improve their job, how we can make things easier for them, and how they can really understand the value and the importance of the work that we're doing.
Welcome, Jason, Laurie. How you doing? Jason, Laurie, made it sound like one person. Jason and Laurie. Oh, there you go. How you both doing?
Good, thank you.
Yeah, really good. And when it comes to some of these projects, like the Bruce Power project that we just talked about, Jason and Laurie, it is a combination, certainly.
Yeah.
Most definitely.
No, it's fabulous, and it was obvious. The teamwork was obvious in there. So we're live with our audience now, and this is their opportunity for them to ask questions for us. So the audience, you put your questions in the chat, and we'll pose those questions to Jason and Laurie in there. I start out with just first question for me, and we'll get them in there. But I've worked in heavy engineering myself in there. It was actually mining, but similar thing. The thing that I found fascinating was how difficult and how valuable it was to get the right document or drawings at the right time. Did that, Laurie, when you got on site, did that make you go, wow, as well?
Well, I guess it's definitely something that is the same at Bruce Power, but it speaks to how technical the work that they do. And you are correct. Sometimes it is one document that is the source of truth that they need to reference.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the things you mentioned, this question in there, just get this right, that the project didn't have the same goals at the start as in the beginning. Is that pretty common in your experience?
Yeah.
Jason?
Go ahead, Jason.
Go ahead. Well, I'll start off just by saying that it's what we discovered mostly is how the organizations are capable of consuming technology is more important than does the technology work. So maybe, Laurie, you could talk about that at first.
Good luck.
I think,
yeah, Laurie.
Yeah, as we were saying in the video, it just evolved as we got on site and we started working closely with our counterparts at Bruce Power. and we saw what the technology could do and how they could use it. It was just a natural progression. So it just evolved as we worked closely and understood the business more.
Yeah. Okay. So this concept of data discovery you had with there, what can we learn from your experience that would make us all better at data discovery?
I think the notion of not always going in with a set agenda or a set. I'm going to use the word outcome for lack of a better word, but you don't. It is exactly that. You don't always know what you're going to find, and generally, what we've seen is it is surprising. We find things that we didn't anticipate, that the organization thought was no longer there or was no longer needed, and through that deep dive. Those first couple of months of data discovery, we really find out that things are different, and what you have and what you're storing and what you need may not be what you initially anticipated.
Yeah, I think you have to be prepared to do that in any project, but in analytics and data discovery, I think you've got to be open to that.
Exactly, going in with an open mind is absolutely one of the first steps.
Great. Julian, and thanks, Julian, for putting your name in there. Wanted to know how to prioritize gaps. And I didn't give us, hopefully we can guess what gaps means in there, but maybe you can add to that, Julian. But I think that's the gaps in understanding, various gaps in the project.
So I think that's where the open communication with the client really comes into play. It's not necessarily something we can, as Shiny Docs, as a consultant company, can come in and prioritize for another organization. It really is that conversation of what is important. Let's work together to figure out how we should order this and how we should prioritize it. And again, have relatively frequent check-ins to reprioritize and re-examine what's important and what we want to accomplish.
Yeah, interesting in there. Another question came up on metadata, and obviously that's one of the big things that people try to do when they're doing an analytics project. But have you found that the attention to metadata is improved as people get better search or see the consequences of search?
Well, I mean, data enrichment is a process, and it's something definitely we talk about a lot at Shiny Docs as we move towards any project. That metadata is enriched according to need, according to functional area or department. But definitely the goal at the end, or one of the goals, is to really make sure that metadata, what we're capturing and what we're layering on top, makes sense and helps an organization find what they need as quickly as possible.
Yeah, good stuff. Jason, this might be for you as well. In there, Robert says, I'm trying to build a data-centric culture in my department. And I know you've done that in your company as well, but with clients. But what resources can they find to help them build this type of culture?
The data-centric culture we found works best when you start with the product or service that you provide to your customers as the source of truth and what you are trying to improve initially. The projects that generally are off the C-levels radar are the ones that are insurance type of projects to keep us from getting sued or keep us from getting hacked, and that's why they end up getting relegated to perhaps IT and then not get the attention. So to build the data culture is to show this is how our product will literally get more customers, get a better customer experience, will generate more leads for less money with leveraging this information. And as long as you're tying the data to that and then working with vendor organizations and working internally to actually start actioning it, because ideas are a dime a dozen. You can have lots of ideas, but unless you have a strategy and a plan for implementing them, then it's not going to work. So that to me is the key element, is aligning with what you do as an organization first. And then by default, once you have that data alignment, all of a sudden you get those other insurance elements as well. The ability to have defensible disposition and all those other things should be secondarily to improving your primary product and service.
Yeah. And Laurie, you mentioned it in the video, and I've been a project lead myself on things. the culture at Bruce Power is astonishing. You know,
Yeah, I mean, I think we're really quite lucky that it's an organization that is focused on outcomes, open to change, and really receptive to change. I mean, it definitely makes our job a lot easier, but it is a culture of continuous improvement, and it really, I mean, I think it's one of the reasons why the project is so successful.
yeah, in there. Another great question. We're getting a lot of them, and we might not get to them all, but we'll try. Other than communication, what other problems do you expect to arise when dealing with a client, and what measures do you take to solve them?
I'll take the first stab at this one. Is that what we find when we get in a lot of these organizations is generally the first touch point that we have is somebody who has been assigned a task rather than somebody has been assigned a purpose. When you start at the board, the C-level, working down into managers and then into that, quite often the overall purpose is to modernize the business to attract better employees, get a better reputation for safety. That's the big purpose at the top level. But then once it gets distilled down through managers and others, all of a sudden now it might just turn into, okay, we're going to do a SharePoint project. And then the person that you're talking to is saying, well, help us with our SharePoint project. And if you don't help them tie it back up to the bigger reputational goals, the bigger employment goals, then you are at the mercy of something that in the bigger grand scheme of things doesn't matter. So that's the thing that I believe Bruce Power does really well, is the accessibility to their purpose, and then working with each layer of management to ensure that purpose is distilled down to each level is the critical component, which makes the teamwork make the dream work.
Yeah, we could do a whole session on that, the linking of purpose and outcome. And I know Doug's session that started this was made some points on that as well. Yeah, good stuff. Okay, so I think we got to wrap it up, but we've got questions out there. We will get back to you with the answers somehow. I don't know how yet, but we're going to do that. Jason, Laurie, great project. I've seen this video and I'll watch it again and again. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's our pleasure, Jim. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, Jason and Laurie. Thanks for your audience, for your great questions. I was you'd always worry whether you're going to get enough questions, and then they're just coming in, and you're fabulous. So, if you found something interesting or useful in that discussion, why not share it? Use the hashtag #AnalyticsUnleashed on Twitter, and you'll see it on the live feed on the platform. So, our next case study comes from the world of finance. Pre-pandemic, you couldn't go anywhere without seeing a Questrade billboard or digital ad. As Canada's fastest growing online brokerage, Questrade needs to tap into and correlate oceans of data. And I mean oceans of data from multiple sources. Now, with this, they create charts and tables that customers need to understand where they're going to invest their hard-earned money. Here to talk about how this company tackles the challenge is Marina Vasiliev, Questrade's self-services analytics lead. And again, for those of you just joining, Marina will be available for a short Q&A following her presentation. Marina, let's hear about the challenges you faced.
Hello. Today I would like to share with you my experience in driving our company towards self-service analytics. In one sentence, self-service analytics is meant to shift analytical capabilities from solely IT department towards business units. In a sense, it does require changing the mindset of all business intelligence counterparties, starting from IT department and up to business units. This is an idea how our BI workflow looked like some time ago, before we started. We see here on the right-hand side, the IT team or BI team within it would control all database processes, including the semantic layer, which would be represented either simplistically by views or multidimensional models or generic data sets within analytical tools. And if business users would have data requirements, data questions, they would submit reporting request to IT team. IT team would do the necessary changes in the ETL and the database depending on the case, and they would come up with the visualization. To be honest, there was lots of back and forwards in this process, long turnaround times sometimes, and sometimes was just taken by interaction within those teams. So it was sometimes frustrating. Therefore, getting business buy-in to merge, to shift towards self-sufficiency in analytics was the least challenging endeavor. They would all understand that it is better not to be reliant on IT team availability. They would all understand that it's much better to make their data-driven business decisions quicker. And of course, they're all in favor to get visuals presented according to their liking, as opposed to lengthy explanation to IT team on their preferences. And especially today, when the market is offering a variety of analytical tools with user-friendly development interface, and especially tools which allow us to split the visualization development from modeling development, which is also in its turn is offering low-code intuitive development interface. This is the idea how our end state BI workflow would look like once we shift those analytical layer to business ownership. IT team would be focused on robust data processes, which includes data warehouse, data marts, and the semantic layer, including, again, views, multidimensional models, or generic enterprise-level data sets, reusable data sets within the analytical tool. Also, IT team would be still producing regulatory, executive, and client-facing reporting, while business units would create their visual layer, of course, and they would connect to raw, to source data and prototype their own modeling. Some data specialists in the business units would own their department semantic layer. So this all sounds very promising, but reality, we are facing some challenges along the way that we have to overcome. So which are those challenges? First of all, inaccurate results or poor performance just due to the knowledge gaps of business stakeholders. Also, misinterpretation of source data. One of the issues, again, is isolated, not reusable products created by different departments. For example, marketing department would create the data set, which is mirroring the work of back office department, which is similar, just with slight difference. And they're not reusing each other's work because they're just not aware of it. The biggest concern is the compliance to enterprise security and privacy rules. And of course, the people constraint, which is business units may just lack necessary skills. So how do we overcome, how do we mitigate all those challenges? We've launched the self-service BI framework, call it the enablement program. This is the multi-activity endeavor where we started with bringing awareness to business units, especially management and upper management level, to explain the benefits of being self-sufficient, explain benefits on getting their data insights quicker. Then we've launched the training program with wide audience seminars to show how to produce their visualizations. Then we've spotted out the individual data scientists within the teams for their more individual addressed training on how to create their modeling level. Then we've set up the data governance foundation. And I'll be honest, this is the prerequisite. We even before we launched this whole program, we cataloged all our data assets. And just within this framework, we showed them how to explore those catalogs and to find out the true source of data, to find out what can be used for calculation, what can be used for mishmash in different entities. Then we came up with our internal QA process, created the QA checklists available for business unit stakeholders, and we split the prototyping environment from the trusted workspace. And then we showed consumers how to distinguish between prototype sandboxes and trusted workspaces, because we want consumers to help us to encourage, to enforce the quality compliance. And after a bunch of quick wins, we started to gradually tighten our quality criteria, and thus we came up with the internal certification program. Let's call it badging. Badging the super users or contributors from business units. And we rewarded the badged contributors by exposing their products to the upper environment. And eventually, we came up with something like a phased landscape, staged approach, consisting of a bunch of quick wins. It looks quite uneven across different departments. Some departments already reached the ultimate goal. Many departments already have data scientists, which are creating their department semantic layer. Their co-workers are quite comfortable in creating their own reports. Some of the departments are comfortable in the visualization layer, but they're still reliant on the IT team to model, to create their data sets. And some of the teams have one or two individuals which are producing the reports, and the rest of the colleagues could be read-only consumers. So this is fine. This is a staged approach, like a hybrid uneven landscape. But even with this, we already see huge benefits. We already see that report creation burden is being spread across the departments, and we were able to prevent BI team from being the critical bottleneck in this process. So benefits for sure outweigh any challenges, and we hope to reach the ultimate goal soon. Thank you.
Marina, welcome. Welcome to the Analytics Unleashed stage here. Where are you joining us from?
Thank you. I'm joining from home, actually. We're still working from home.
Oh, yeah.
But
yeah.
moving towards hybrid mode soon.
Saw the great picture, and the great guitar in the picture when we were there. We're looking at there. So, audience, you know the drill. So use the chat to ask the questions and about this visualization initiative, and we'll go through it. So, I want to start it with one question of mine, because I heard it in one. I heard various edits of this thing when we were being prepared, but you used the phrase self-sufficiency and instead of self-service at one point. I'm assuming that was intentional. What did you have in mind?
To be honest, I used it interchangeably in my speech. They are quite synonymic, self-service and self-sufficiency, but self-sufficiency would be more of the ultimate goal, because we can serve ourselves in a different ways, in different formats. But I would really call team self-sufficient once they really reach the ultimate goal, once they can be independent and can be producing the certified production-looking products.
Great. Okay. So you also talk about the business areas having their own resources, data scientists or something like that. Do they have? What are the key things that the business area should be looking for when they're trying to get people in their resources? Obviously, I mean, IT handles part of the work in this. So, how does that work?
Thank you so much. This is one of the challenges. Actually, I refer to it as a people constraint. Not all the business departments are ready. Not all of them do have this data literacy as a prerequisite, and we need to develop it. This is one of the major parts of this whole self-service analytic platform, enablement platform. We are teaching people to know how to produce visuals, and we are teaching specific individuals from each team to dive deeper and to go beyond just this visualization layer and to go towards data preparation on the semantic layer to do their own data sets. And of course, not 100% the whole business team is ready for that, has enough data literacy skills, and we are working with one or two individuals within a team, luckily. Yeah. And sometimes we need to do recruitment for that.
I'm always afraid of geeking out too much on some things question, but this, somebody put this in from the audience, so I've got to get splitting the visualization from modeling. Now, this allows you to be creative and still maintain your accuracy, right? Is that what you had in mind when you were talking about that?
Correct. Fortunately, there are multiple tools available, and we have one of those tools which do allow us to split this visualization layer from the dataset modeling layer. And usually visualization is something we can teach within a couple of hours, and most of our business users are ready to jump in. But for modeling within the analytical tool, we pick a couple of individuals from the team who are ready to participate, and this is what I call actually self-sufficient within BI. If each business team has a couple of individuals which can help to dive into this layer, analytical layer.
But I don't mean to, sorry to interrupt, but I love that idea of having a single source of truth, your data, but allowing the users the freedom to explore it.
Regarding single source of truth, this is one of the very important prerequisites, data foundation. It needs to be in place even before we launch this whole self-service analytic platform. And if we do not have a good data foundation from which we start, it will look like we are sailing a boat and trying to build it at the same time. So there are two very important prerequisites before we even launch this program. One is the data governance, where all our data assets are properly cataloged, and also we teach business units after they produce their own products to also input into those catalogs so that it's reusable. And second is a proper data foundation. There are lots of flavors of this data foundation within data warehouse. It could be data marts, it could be cubes, like multidimensional cubes, or any other structures of this virtual layer, of the abstraction layer, semantic layer. We call it different ways. But without these prerequisites, it will be like we are bringing the do-it-yourself users not to IKEA, but to the raw material factory, And so this proper foundation is actually key to success.
Which leads us to this idea of data governance in there, and that was as a prerequisite. So companies struggle with this. It's one of the areas, every time I have a conversation with somebody, we have that same level of interest comes up. How are you doing with data governance? What are your successes? Do you have any tips for people or any ideas that could help people be more successful at governance?
There are lots of tools on the market which allow us to catalog properly metadata of all our data assets, and it has become the culture in the company. Any production data asset should be properly cataloged by its owner. And again, the participants, all the stakeholders, the participants of self-service analytics, they should also input their own products. They should come up with a proper metadata and catalog it properly. This is, of course, before we launch the self-serve analytic, all the underlying data assets should be cataloged. And this is our truth, source of truth.
Sorry, don't want to interrupt you. Lou from the audience said, data capture and contextualization takes time to especially when done with the business. How do you keep that momentum going?
So, first of all, of course, not all the business users are ready to produce the production-looking products, which satisfy all our quality criteria. So we have we are giving them quick wins. We let them prototype first. We let them see some result, any type of result. Put it in a lower environment. Be happy with what you see, and then we gradually start tightening the requirements. And if users want to see it in production in the upper environment locations, workspaces, they need to go through our internal QA certification process, and we gradually teach them. We give them the list of our recommendations, best practices. So we are just following the method of quick wins first, prototypes first, and then gradually tighten and come to the trusted products eventually on the upper environment.
So keeping them moving forward is also quick wins.
Correct.
What type of quick wins did you get that you could share with you?
Yes, regarding quick wins, these are just the mock-ups, the prototypes, smaller data sets, visualizations which just fit their immediate needs. We just answer the today's business questions, and moving away from quick wins towards the better reusable product is trustable with all the metadata definition, documented, reusable data sets. And this is the opposite of quick wins, meaning quick wins is just the whatever mock-up, and eventually we are moving these quick wins towards reusable data sets.
But you showed them where they could go. Yeah.
Yes.
Good stuff. Yeah. One last question. We've got requests from the business teams to IT times have declined, or they're at zero now. How's the flow for requests gone? That Julian asked that.
I'll be honest, our IT team is still very, very busy. First of all, we are still serving the client-facing regulatory reports, and we are constantly building the data foundation. Also, we are constantly honing this data foundation because there are inputs, feedbacks from the self-service business units where we need to enrich the data foundation so that their task is easier. And again, there are some teams which are still trying to catch up. And BI team, IT team is still helping a lot in that, and they are helping a lot towards productionizing the teams which are still somewhere in the middle, meaning they are in the quick wins stage. They are producing the mock-ups, producing the prototypes, but require some help in polishing those products. So to be honest, IT team is still very busy, but the company grew tremendously during the last period of time, and only this self-service analytic approach led us just to handle all this amount of work.
Yeah, we're not going to run out of work to do. Nobody in IT is going to run out of work, but we can serve the users better. Marina, thank you so much. We've got to move on, and we've got more questions. As I said to the group, we're getting great questions. We'll find a way to get back to them. Thank you so much for sharing with us, and we'll see you again.
Thank you.
Wow. Okay, so here to share. Okay, so some recent trends that analytics should be jumping on. This is our next session in there, is Steve Bickerton. Now, Steve's the Senior Principal for SAP in the North American Center of Excellence. I'm going to turn it over to Steve.
Hi, folks. My name is Steve Bickerton, and a lot of customers ask me how analytics has changed in the last 10 years. And many of you are familiar with older solutions that have been out in the marketplace for some time, but really there's been an evolution in decision making where customers have gone from these enterprise reporting systems like that showed what happened yesterday. So historical reporting, really kind of top down and linear reporting where it's IT is curating that data and curating reports and sending it out. And the next step of that evolution was into something like self-service analytics, where business users were doing data discovery to find out trends that were going on in the marketplace. And then they would push those visualizations out to coworkers. And this was really driven by the analyst. The next stage to this evolution, and it's something that SAP has really been focusing on, is this concept of augmented analytics, where you're smart on a click. So intelligence is gained by just sort of engaging an algorithm to give you more details. So for example, if you wanted to know why sales were up or sales were down, rather than kicking off a large data discovery effort, you could simply do a right click and say, show me insights. So extremely powerful. And this can be done by anyone, whether it's an IT or an analyst or anyone on the front lines interacting with this report or this tool. And what we've done to make SAP Analytics Cloud really special is not only bring this augmented experience into it, but also bring planning as well. So you could leverage the three capabilities of analytics. So business intelligence to figure out what happened yesterday, predictive to figure out what's going to happen 90 to 180 days from now. So that augmented experience I was just talking about, and then planning to best prepare for that outcome. So if we see that sales are going up or there's going to be an impact to our supply chain because of COVID, we can update our plans accordingly so we're best prepared for that outcome. And we're one of the only vendors actually doing this on the marketplace, bring all three of these functions or functionality into one tool, and they seamlessly interact together. And SAP Analytics Cloud means a lot to SAP. It is our strategic analytics platform for all our core SAP analytics application or all our business applications moving forward. So this includes our S4 ERP systems, our supply chain systems, our travel, our budgeting, et cetera, et cetera. So it is at the centerpiece of SAP's digital strategy. Furthermore, we have a complete line of pre-built content for all industries and all lines of business. So thousands of pieces of content covering not only our S4 deployments, but every industry from banking to chemical to consumer products, mill products, et cetera. It's also embedded into a lot of our products as well. So everything from Fieldglass to Concur to Ariba to SuccessFactors. So it is, as I mentioned earlier, our go-forward strategy for analytics at SAP. So what is this augmented experience I was talking about? So what we've done is we've brought in smart assist features into the product so that you can easily move through using these predictive features on a click. So we have the ability to use regression on the fly. So if I wanted to figure out everything behind a number, so maybe I'm looking at retirement values for pilots, I could figure everything out that I wanted to know about that possible number. Or if I wanted to figure out why sales were going up or sales were going down, I could simply do a right click to find out what's going on. And this is not something you need to be a data scientist for. This is really the task worker can do this. I can take any chart that has time data in it, so a calendar, and forecast any numeric, whether it's sales, costs, attrition, etc. All of that's available on a click. So very intuitive for our end users. It has a full R engine built into it as well. So you can do R visualizations as well as the ability to do a forecast using our Smart Predict feature. So tons and tons of features in for our customer base. And I'm going to show you a quick video that highlights this right now. So right now I'm just going to use natural language and type in, who are my top 5 customers? I'm using the English language. It comes back with a chart. I can quickly add this to a screen. I can size this chart out any way I want. It'll sort of snap to grid. And I can even come back in and start to ask another question. So I could say, what is revenue in China? And it'll come back with a numeric point. So it'll change the chart type on the basis of what I ask. So it's very intuitive in that regards. It's picking the right chart for me. And if I say, show me revenue in China by date, it'll change to a line chart. If I say by date and by product, it'll do a dual line chart. So really, really smart in that regards. Furthermore, I could add in predictive text and ask the database to tell me what's driving revenue by these dimension types. And it'll tell me that my revenue is being driven by my high-tech sector. I can click on the light bulb for further insights. So it's going to give me 5 or 6 different insights and rank them by contribution. So I can see here that my web server is my top product sale And I could add this to my chart as well. So using those predictive features in the tool really easily. And finally, I can take that date graph and just add in a simple forecast and figure out where we're going, what our revenue is going to look like in 90 days from now. And likewise, I can adjust the chart below so I can understand what that's going to look like, what that trend will look like, so I can best prepare for that outcome. So either increasing supply or decreasing supply. So in this little 3 to 4 minute video, you could see something that was very, very simple to use. You'll also notice in the middle screen that you'll see my forecast is in green. So it actually likes my sample size. So if anyone knows anything about statistics, sample sizes matter, obviously. So very easy to use for our end users. Some other really interesting insights that you can gain. So I talked about this right click and getting more insights. So this was a predictive insights for a large airline that I was working with, and they wanted to understand what retirement was going to look like for them in a few years. So you have 62,000 employees, 20,000 were eligible for retirement. The CFO said to me, he says, I really only care about pilots because they're so highly skilled. Everyone else is a little bit more replaceable. I simply did that right click I was talking about, clicked on the light bulb, and sure enough, I could see pilots, over half their pilots are eligible for retirement. So 3,900 pilots are eligible for retirement. So that would start to allow this airline to start putting plans in place to replace these pilots. And given that it is such a highly trained position, and automation isn't coming anytime soon. Likewise, I have a Canadian use case where I was working with a province on opioid prescriptions, and they were trying to understand who was prescribing the opioids and where the prescriptions were being filled. So they're really trying to understand everything that was related to this data. So you can kind of see in this town, we have 1,042 prescriptions of opioids. And if I click on that light bulb, aptly named Smart Insights, it tells me everything I know. The first thing I see in my anonymized data is the doctor ID of the doctor that's been prescribing, who's been doing the most prescriptions. And he's 1,045% above average. And at the bottom, I could see that there's a pharmacy called North Bay Pharmacy, which is the largest pharmacy filling those prescriptions. And they are 360% above average. So as a healthcare professional, those would be the two places that I would want to start to investigate first. The power of this is that with older tools, I would have had to kick off a massive data discovery to get these insights that I was able to get with SAP Analytics Cloud in about 5 seconds. So the power really is having that information at your fingertip. And so you'll be able to answer that question when you present data to your C-suite, when they ask that very difficult question to answer when they say, should I care? And you can say, yes, you should, and here's why. Or here's what our next steps should be, which is incredibly powerful. Other things that you can do with the tool is that you can take any measure or dimension and completely dissect that value and find out everything that you needed to know. So whether it was retirement, as I was mentioning earlier, I could find out everything that's highly correlated with that retirement value. I could find outliers. So an outlier, I love outliers. Outliers, a great example of this is, who's been taking travel and or doing travel and staying in a $500 a night hotel. Because as we know, most hotels are between $150 and $220 a night. So once that regression line is built, which is done automatically, you don't have to do anything. It'll tell me all the outliers, the positive outliers and the negative outliers. So the folks that have been staying in the cheap hotels and the people who have been staying in the ridiculously expensive hotels. And then I could also do a simulation. So I could say, hey, if I'm opening up a branch in China, what would my sales look like? If I had this sales profile in China, I could easily sort of simulate what sales would be. So everything from correlations to unexpected values or outliers, and then simulating next steps is possible with the tool. I can also leverage predictive for planning. So if you think of most plans, they're based on business acumen. And sometimes our business acumen is off. So one of the things we can do is use an algorithm to forecast and validate our business acumen. So the combination of business acumen and machine learning will result in a better plan. So bringing historical data, machine learning, and business acumen together can ensure that I have a plan that's that is displaying correctly. So in this example, I have a plan here for products for a bike company, and I'm just doing a forecast for the next 10 months or so to see what those sales are, so I could update my plan accordingly. And then finally, one of the really neat things that I can do with SAP Analytics Cloud is that I can put it on a boardroom screen and have an immersive analytics experience where, rather than debating the results of the data, we could have interactive conversations doing what-if analysis and engaging all those smart features to figure out what is best for our business. So data-driven insights rather than debates on the accuracy of the data. And this can be done on a Samsung screen or a Microsoft Surface Hub or Surface screen quite easily, and turns unproductive meetings into highly productive engagements. With that, I want to thank everyone for listening to me today and attending. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Steve. I'm struggling to keep up. This section on predictive analytics had lots of note taking for me. Just don't worry. If you missed some key points, the writers at IT World Canada, ITWC, are in the audience taking notes for you. So articles from today's sessions will appear on itworldcanada.com, itbusiness.ca, computerdealernews.com, or channeldailynews.com, and they can be found on this platform. So don't worry about that. I'll do a Colbert moment, Colbert without the Emmy, and take that off camera. So tell all your friends in this, and we've got more to come today, and this one is a great session. I'm just looking forward to this. We're going to change things up for a bit for the next few minutes. My friend, Yogi Schultz. Yogi, if you're out there, hi, and you are out there because you're going to be coming on camera in a second. He's a senior consultant at Corvell Consulting, and he's going to share some things not to do when it comes to data visualization. He's got some examples of some pretty serious bloopers and things we can all learn from. Now, following his presentation, there's going to be the live analytics quiz sponsored by Citrix. So get ready to keep clicking. Put questions in the chat. If we don't get answers from the participants, we'll get back to you with them. So take it away, Yogi.
Thank you to ITWC for hosting this event and inviting me to speak today. My name is Yogi Schultz. In this presentation, I'll describe common data visualization bloopers and their solutions. You can easily adopt these solutions to impress the audiences that you present to. Who am I? I founded Corvell Consulting over 20 years ago. We offer information technology consulting related management consulting work. I write a regular column at IT World Canada that's targeted at CIOs and IT managers. So let's talk about data visualizations. Cluttered versus minimalist data visualizations. You can see this, how confusing this chart is. We've all sat through unreadable, confusing, boring, or even misleading presentations with their associated data visualizations. The latest example is data visualizations about the COVID-19 pandemic. Here's a humorous chart that's a sarcastic reaction to many of the unintelligible COVID-19 data visualizations. Poor or mediocre data visualizations are caused by a lack of thoughtfulness about how best to present the data in a chart that will resonate with our audiences. Sometimes the problem is that the author of the data visualization is using a chart to deliberately mislead the audience. That's unfortunate. In this presentation, I'll show examples of the worst offending data visualizations. For each example, I'll describe how to make the data visualization more powerful so that it will communicate your message better. Overall, we should avoid cluttered charts and aim for a minimalist approach. Less is more is a phrase adopted in 1947 by the architect Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. This statement applies big time to data visualizations. We must avoid confusing clutter at all times. So in this cartoon, we see him say, he's right. When you look at the chart this way, it's not so bad. Be positive about the data you're presenting, but not misleading. Okay, here's the first one. Bad design versus good design. The two data visualizations display exactly the same data. The bad design chart that you see suffers from several problems, including annotating every data point with its value. The annotations overwhelm the chart and hide its message. The y-axis label is an abbreviation that's not easily understood. The y-axis does not start at 0. The x-axis numbers suggest an increasing range of value, but are in fact the number of a month. The year associated with the months is not shown. The legend and the time series symbols are too far out of the way visually. So here's the good design of the same data. It's more visually appealing and avoids these problems by formatting the 3 time series to stand out prominently and avoid a legend, replacing all the data point annotations with a table of value. Now the values are still available, but they don't detract from this chart. Spelling out the y-axis label, starting the y-axis at 0, labeling the x-axis with month abbreviations, showing the year associated with the data. A well-designed data visualization focuses on displaying the data, but it's never busy. Here we have an example of an unclear pie chart versus a clear bar chart. Avoid creating pie charts like this one on the left. We humans can't easily estimate the relative size of the areas of the slices. Those size estimates are almost always required to understand the message of the pie chart. Your message will be much more easily understood by your audience by another data visualization type, such as a line chart or a horizontal bar chart, like this one on the right. A horizontal bar chart shows the lengths of the bars, and they communicate the values instantly. By labeling the individual bars, we avoid a legend. A legend requires your audience to look back and forth between the legend and the chart while remembering a specific color. That tedious effort is also prone to error of understanding of what's going on. Now here we have a situation where we have a choice between a confusing message and a strong message. The Siamese chart that I'm showing here brings together multiple time series, various line types, multiple data points. The manually drawn blue lines and the text boxes turn everything into a visually confusing mess that will only annoy your audience. There's a low limit to the amount of data your audience can absorb at one time. This chart far exceeds that upper limit. Now, here's a similar chart that illustrates the upper limit of the number of time series that a line chart can contain and still be an effective communication vehicle. Notice how sleek and straightforward this chart is. Now we have coincidental correlation versus strong causation. Correlation between arcade revenue and computer science doctorates is a totally coincidental correlation. If this correlation were accurate, a candidate with a computer science doctorate could improve their likelihood of being awarded the degree by spending more time playing arcade games. We know this is nonsense. We need to be extremely skeptical of correlations because coincidental correlations occur frequently during statistical analysis of every type of data. How then do we differentiate a coincidental correlation from a legitimate correlation? Well, legitimate correlations are explained through a plausible analytic story that describes a strong relationship between the 2 time series. There's no plausible story that can relate to 2 time series in the previous chart. However, in this second chart, you can tell a plausible story about how interest rates and inflation rates are related. That's an example of strong causation. Multiple y-axes versus very few y-axes. Some charts use 2 or even more y-axes so that the data points for multiple variables can be displayed on one data visualization. Before applying this chart type, you have to ask yourself, is there really a relationship among the variables I want to show on one data visualization? If the answer is yes, then this chart type can enhance your presentation. If the answer is no, which is often the case, then you're likely using this chart type for one of the more following dysfunctional reasons. First, you're trying to reduce the number of slides or the space being used. There's no value in that approach. Second, you're deliberately trying to mislead your audience by claiming a relationship where there isn't one. That's unethical. In either case, you will create confusion for your audience. That's never good. The more y-axes you want to use, the more you should ask yourself if you should be using multiple clearer data visualizations rather than a jam-packed one. A better alternative is to show multiple data visualizations side by side or successive slides. This chart on the right illustrates an effective use of multiple y-axes. There's one y-axis on each side of the chart. The color of each y-axis is identical to the color of the associated data. Using a histogram for one time series and a line for the other is an excellent contrast technique that also avoids clutter and improves communication. Now, what about a misleading truncated y-axis versus a full y-axis? Truncating the y-axis by starting at a value greater than 0 accentuates the differences among your data values. It's usually employed to mislead the audience, as in this example chart. Charts should show a baseline of 0. When you look at a chart, try to confirm that's the case. Often, a data visualization designer resorts to truncating the y-axis because he or she has realized that the more accurate chart won't be meaningful to the audience and doesn't support the recommendation. Those are very poor reasons for this chart type. So a best solution to a truncated y-axis is typically one or more of the following actions. Show the accurate representation of the data and then zoom in on the part of the chart that supports your point. Abandon the ineffective chart. Use another chart type for your data and perhaps use different data from your analysis. And thirdly, sometimes we just have to grin and bear it and accept that the data doesn't support your recommendation. Continue your analysis, identify a new and supportable recommendation. Now, here's an example of errors in arithmetic versus accurate arithmetic. The slices of a pie chart must always equal 100%. Now, perhaps this chart designer was consuming too much of the product when he or she designed this chart. This pie chart is an example of using the wrong chart type to represent your data. The 3 data points are all associated with specific years. A better chart type for this time series is 3 vertical histograms. Always check your data visualization for arithmetic problems before you publish it. Identifying a small problem may lead to further design thinking that will improve your chart effectiveness. So now we have no motion versus motion. The chart on the left is basic and boring. Incorporating motion into the data visualization is an excellent way to present time series data. Whenever you can add motion to your data, you will convey your message more effectively. Presenting trends in your data is always more powerful than showing only point-in-time data. So those are the points I wanted to discuss today. So here's what I want you to do. Avoid these chart bloopers. Replace a cluttered design with a minimalist design. Avoid bar charts. In many cases, a bar chart or a line chart is better. Simplify a confusing message to produce a stronger message. Don't let coincidental correlations fool you. Look for strong causation. Don't show a truncated y-axis. Always show a full y-axis. And upgrade no motion charts to a motion chart whenever that's feasible. Well, I hope you found these ideas useful. If you look at the downloads, you'll see a sheet there that contains these points and many more that you can use to help you improve the visualizations that you're working with. We invite you to register for these 2 webinars that I'll be giving in a few weeks to explore data analytics and the related data visualization topics in more detail. Please register using the webinar description document that's also found on the download page, and it contains a 50% discount coupon, and you can click on the link there.
Thank you, Yogi. Every time I go to one of your presentations, I learn something new or get something new insight in there. So folks out there, make sure you check out that workshop with Yogi. It'll be fabulous. He's also online right now, so you can, through the chat, you can ask him questions directly in there. Thank you for that as well. And thank you for all the notes and chat on social media and all of that. Our next case study involves a growing company that is attracted to analytics to solve a business problem. Watch for the attraction. Here's Claudio Cagnette. He's the Director of Business Development of the Premo Group. He's going to talk about how the automotive magnet manufacturers, attractive automotive magnet manufacturers, get visibility into their data. And a reminder, Claudio will be around in about 10 minutes, and he's going to take your questions. So check this out.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Claudio Cagnette. I am Business Development Director for Premo Group, a Spanish company. I am located in Malaga today, south of Spain, where our headquarters is. We are a company a tier 2 company in automotive market, mostly with a specialized niche in magnetics, power magnetics. We are more than 50 years in business, mass producing all kind of automotive magnetics, from receiver 3D coils antennas used in passive entry system to power magnetics used in power converters. We are around 1,200 people worldwide, spread out over different plants in China, Vietnam, and Morocco. We have also locations for sales and business development in Korea, Germany, France, USA, and of course the places where our plants like China. Every time we produce a magnetic component, we make a project. Making magnetics for this kind of companies, tier ones in the automotive world, requires customization, and we handle this as a custom project in the company. We handle around 350 projects at once, and we have this consolidated and controlled using Zoho projects since the early beginning of this platform. We are users of massive users of this platform. We took the decision to use Zoho Analytics because of the business intelligence capabilities, and this was a necessity at Premo Group after this big amount of growth in the projects we were handling. The target we had with the implementation of this business intelligence tool was to be able to make decisions, to answer strategic questions, business questions in the company, to allow managers of the different departments, such as operation directors, production line managers, project managers, to be able to produce reports, collecting information from all the organization data sources. We decided to go with Zoho because of the easy learning, we can say. Our managers were able to generate reports very fast with a learning curve very, very small. Okay. In 1 day, 2 days, they were already using custom pivots made by themselves. Today, we have growth this platform, including Salesforce, which is our CRM. All the sales department collect and generate the data from the different leads, contacts, inquiries, projects using Salesforce. Zoho projects, as I said, individual databases that we have from different kind of data, like materials data, data sheets from suppliers, and so on. And recently, we include Zoho Creator. We have started using Zoho Creator as a platform to develop our own applications based on this data. Integrating these data sources in Zoho Analytics was a challenge, especially at the very beginning, especially with SAP, because we had to make customized scripts. Today, thanks to data preparation tool, we can say this task is much easier, but at the beginning, it was a customized programming from our side to be able to integrate this data from SAP. The data source integration was made, and after this, the complete departments and people in Premo Group was able to access this data and generate the reports they needed. We were able to start to make decision based on the data coming from these reports. Departments like purchasing, production, engineering, R&D, the ones handling the projects, were able to check how was the workload, how was the amount of projects ongoing, which project was in priority in terms of action needed. Analytics was able to send alerts automatically to the users. This has been a real success in terms of improving the operations of the different departments. One of the examples of the decision-making activities that we were doing using this tool was one of our stakeholders in a management meeting was considering selling their stake in the business. So this stakeholder requested to our management team a report coming from Premo outlining all the relevant data he wanted to help to make this important decision. So we had to do a lot of data collection. Imagine we don't have Zoho Analytics at that moment. A lot of manual operations and manual activities was required to do this, collecting all this data in individual Excel sheets and preparing this report. Having this in Zoho Analytics in real time was a matter of pulling everything in a dynamic pivot and some graphs in a dashboard and presenting this to the stakeholder. It was a matter of no more than one or 2 days of work to fine-tune this report. And he was presented with this data and he was able to take the decision very fast. Another example was a customer, one of our major customers coming from Germany, already in mass production, purchasing to us in a monthly basis several millions of coils, small coils, antennas for automotive keys. And he was asking, was the possibility from our production lines to double the capacity? Again, collecting all data from production lines individually, consolidating them, and doing the calculations of the capacity in terms of cycle time, bottlenecks, scrap level, yield performance, and so on. It was a matter of a lot of manual activities and manual data collection if we have to do this without Zoho Analytics. Today, this data is available in real time. It's coming directly from the production lines to the cloud, to the system. So making this calculation is something, in fact, that we do in a daily basis automatically in the existing reports that we have today. So we only have to open these reports, filter by this customer, this particular part number, and check the spare capacity available. So we were able to answer to the customer in a matter of hours. And this was impressive, even for this German customer. They were really giving us a feedback that we were really unique in terms of answering these questions because other suppliers were not able to answer it so fast. Finally, as I wrap up the presentation, I would like to emphasize the big change in our company implemented since the decision to go with a cloud business intelligence tool like Zoho Analytics. The improvement has been significant and is still improving these days. We are including more and more data sources in this tool and increasing the performance and the capabilities of our departments. Data preparation tool has been a big leverage in terms of preparing the data and reducing the amount of queries, custom queries, and custom scripts we are doing today. And with the new capabilities coming in the tool, like data stories and augmented analytics, we expect to go further in this important IT tool for the company. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the presentation.
Claudio, welcome. Thanks for taking the time. We've got the live audience out there, and they've got some questions after watching the case study. So I'm going to just go ahead and put those. But well, let's start with some of the questions we can go through.
Okay.
Why did you use Zoho over other solutions? What caused you to pick that?
Well, the main reason is it was very clear when we did the evaluation. It was the short time to learn to make reports by our management. This was clearly the main factor to make the decision through this analytics platform. It is very, very fast, the time needed by a manager here in the company to go from understanding the data model to generate the first custom reports for their department, their people, or only by himself.
Yeah, and that ability for people to get results quickly is part of what sustains the effort, right?
Yeah, definitely. This is clearly something, is a huge advantage. We evaluated other platforms, and clearly this is one of the best topics.
Cool. In there. So the other case in this, data is only as good as the accuracy and getting the people to put the data into the system. I've had my own challenges with that, but what challenges did you have with the interface between the humans and the analytics?
Well, fortunately, Zoho allows you to regulate this a little with the permissions and the way you arrange the users and the access you give to different reports and queries and data tables. But it's true, we involve several IT groups in the company. We have several factories, as you saw in the video, and each one has an IT department with different people from different locations and different continents. And it's always a challenge to make a global action in Premo, because we are in China, in Vietnam, in Europe, in Germany, many places. But it was, we can say, a success because of our interaction with them. But we got our challenges, for example, with Chinese people, okay, or Vietnamese people. Asians doesn't work in the same way, and we had to train them and to kind of monitor them on what they were doing with the data model and with the data tables when integrating data specifically from their factory, you know?
So you've got language, you've got culture, and different work methods, different work processes that people use.
Yeah.
So what did you do about that?
Well, we send people. This is something.
Okay.
This is something we did during the COVID situation. We were lucky enough to have Spaniards traveling over there with permission, and one of the activities they made when they were visiting the plant was monitoring this and training them in the way we wanted to integrate the data, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So talking about the data, in manufacturing, there's not just like concrete, there's drawings, photographs. How did you deal with the issue of structured versus unstructured data?
I have to say that we are a company where most of the data we use is structured in terms of the manufacturing data, okay? Because the production plant of that produce millions of magnetics, like the ones that we deployed, are highly automatized. We have a lot of machinery, automatic machinery and robots, and these devices generates a lot of structured data. Okay, so this is, I can say, 80% of the data we upload or synchronize in the cloud with analytics is having a very clear structure and very well regulated. We have a more non-structured data coming from our salespeople. Okay, yeah. Our sales department is more chaotic, and we have, of course, we have leads, we have contacts, we have inquiries, but they work much worse than a robot, you know. So we have to deal on that side of the sales department is more non-structured tables.
But you have a great deal of structured data, so that in there. And so, now, did you have to reevaluate your IT structure once this solution was implemented? Was there new ways of doing things?
No. That was clearly one of the requirements when doing this activity of data integration and using analytic tool. We didn't want to create a specific department for this or a team of people. It was a request to use the existing people and especially to use the existing managers, because we believe in the philosophy where department bosses are 100% involved in this deployment, because they are going to get advantage of what they do and what they get from this platform. If we put specific engineers in the IT department to generate these reports, to work on this data integration with completely outside of the daily department, operational departments like quality, like customer service, like planning, if they are not involved and the engineers came later and say, hey, here you have a very nice platform with these reports, with this, they will be using it, but not in the same way. They will not be customizing the data coming from this report and generating the specific things they need to improve the daily operations.
Yeah, it's funny. In many cases, people fear analytics or automation because they think it's going to disturb their jobs or replace them. And somehow, we've heard nothing about that, about replacement or anything. It's always, we adapt and we serve the people better, actually. Was that your experience?
Yeah, it was something when the first times we made meetings with the bosses, with the department bosses, we explained to them the tool we were going to deploy was one of the main targets for them was to be able to answer specific business questions. It doesn't mean that previously they were not able to answer, but now they can do these answers much faster and much efficient. Okay, this was target, and they understood perfectly. Okay, to answer complex questions in terms of operations or quality or whatever department. Before they had to collect manually data, they had to make manual reports, sometimes PowerPoint presentations, sometimes specific reports with Excels, with a lot of calculations. Now it could be a matter of days, and now it's a matter of maximum hours, sometimes less than 1 hour to answer the same kind of complex questions.
Yeah, but so there's the speed of response, and of course, if you've ever been on a staff and you get asked that, do an analysis that's going to take you days, it's crushing. But being able to do that in hours is there. I'm just going to do a quick time check in there, just make sure because we've got time for some more questions. Lou asked, when you said data was captured in real time, what's your strategy? Are you still using SCADA systems that exist in the factories to put directly? Where are you getting your data from?
Well, most of the data is coming from our ERP, okay. which is SAP. This is the major source of data because it collects a lot of information and a lot of data, not only from the plant, also from the company operations and so on. And then we have some production lines and some data in the plants that is collected by batches, okay. So the production line is working, and after the shift, when the shift is finished, this data is uploaded to analytics, sometimes with one script, sometimes with a direct connection. And we have also real-time data. We have web services of some equipment. The most modern equipment in our lines are having integrated web services in the PLC, in the controller, that we can access and get the data from the last production cycle, okay? For example, which this is almost for the timing that we handle in production line. This is real time.
Wow, incredible. So, last quick question: what would you do differently?
What do you mean today?
Yeah, knowing what you know, what was your one piece of advice for everybody if they were tackling a project like this?
The best advice, or one of the best advices that I can give is don't be afraid of sitting down with a department boss that has been in the company for 20 years, handling, for example, I don't know, purchasing in one of the plant, the usual manager with a lot of experience. He knows his suppliers, he knows the data he handles, he knows everything. And you have to sit down and change his mind. Okay, so don't be afraid of that, because with a tool like this, it's very easy to open his mind and make completely change the strategy or the philosophy in his head of 20 years doing the same purchasing.
Yeah. We sometimes make people into things they're not. You can change people's minds. Thank you so much. Appreciate it so much. We'll see you again. Hopefully we'll see you in Spain.
Yeah, thank you.
Winter. Pretty good. Thank you. So, thanks, Claudio. And we're going to move now really rapidly into our next case. We're building up momentum here at the next case study. Now, this is another great case study to respond to these concerns about pipelines in Canada. The Alberta Energy Regulatory needs to share pipeline performance data with the public in a visually engaging and easy to use manner. Now, AER developed this series of interactive charts that you'll see in a minute. And they're a lot about what you do right in here. They're applicable in all industries, and they greatly will increase end user engagement. So here to tell us how they did it is Connie Hetherington, AER Pipeline Technical Advisor, and AER Industry Performance Leads Stephanie Lee Jung. And remember that Connie and Stephanie will be live in about 10 minutes to take your questions, so keep those questions coming. We'll roll to video.
I'm sure many of you don't really know much about the AER or what we do, so I'm going to give a very brief overview. We are the provincial regulator for oil and gas activities in Alberta. Our mandate is to ensure the safe, efficient, orderly, and environmentally responsible development of oil, natural gas, and coal resources over their entire life cycle. This includes allocating and conserving water resources, managing public lands, and protecting the environment while we provide economic benefits for all Albertans.
In 2016, the Industry Performance Program was created. The purpose of the program is to measure and assess how companies are performing and share this information with Albertans. Currently, the Industry Performance Program publishes 3 annual reports: the Pipeline Performance Report, Water Use Report, and Methane Emissions. The goal of these reports is to be transparent and accessible for all stakeholders and in turn drive companies to improve their performance. For today's presentation, we will be focusing on the Pipeline Performance Report. We recently released our 5th edition. The report has a broad target audience, including the general public, industry, academia, not-for-profits, and internal AER staff. When we started discussions about what this report would look like, there was a number of issues to overcome. Garbage in is garbage out. We had to ensure that the business was on board with our vision and how this report could provide value to stakeholders and internal staff. We needed to standardize terms and definitions and implement processes to ensure incident records were entered correctly. Records are reviewed on a regular basis, including a validation process with the companies that we report on. This training has continued today as the report evolves, and we continue to focus on ensuring complete and accurate information is being shared. Now we'll get into the visualizations or dashboards available on the AER website. We've selected a few to highlight and discuss today.
This graph shows a high-level summary displaying the increasing pipeline lengths regulated by the AER over time and the total number of pipeline incidents year to year. Here, users can toggle to show the incident ratio, which normalizes the number of incidents for every 1,000 kilometers of pipe.
What you'll see in the following dashboards is that we've tried to enable the user to slice and dice the data in different ways and to ask different questions. For example, a stakeholder might say, okay, even though the total number of incidents is going down, what about high consequence incidents which typically have the greatest impact on the public and or the environment? So then the user can select high consequence and easily see that those incidents are decreasing as well.
This dashboard shows the number of licensees the AER regulates and the total kilometers of pipeline in the different categories of pipeline lengths we have created. We can see that 53% of pipelines are operated by only 20 out of 961 companies. We use this information for assisting us when determining what companies we might need to focus in on more because of the overall amount of risk they might represent. In this next graph, we show the incidents displayed by type. In Alberta, any release from a licensed pipeline under the AER is reportable, along with any incident where a pipeline is contacted when digging around it, which we call hits. Not all releases are equal, so we have a few different categories we bucket them into, with much of our attention focused on leaks and ruptures. This dashboard provides the company-level details. From the left, we have the total length of pipelines for each company, the number of incidents, and the incident ratio, and finally, the total liquid volume released. This is an important visualization because although one company clearly has the most pipeline inventory, its incident ratio is lower than the industry average, whereas some of the smaller companies with fewer pipelines had more incidents and a larger release volume in 2020. This helps us to identify the companies that may require more education or more inspections to ensure compliance and to help improve their performance.
In the full workbook available for stakeholders, companies can group the data by peer group, such as total pipeline length or company production per day. This enables companies to see how they are performing in comparison to others.
Although the total number of incidents and number of high consequence incidents are an important metric, another key metric we look at is the total liquid volume released year to year. This graph shows very clearly that the volume released in 2020 increased significantly. However, when we dig into it deeper, the volume increase was attributed to one high consequence incident. From an incident count and consequence perspective, industry performance seems to be improving. However, from a release perspective, there is still a need for improvements in leak detection to ensure the total volume of fluid release doesn't continue to increase. To understand what can cause an incident to occur, the AER tracks the failure type and the secondary cause of failure. This visualization shows that most incidents are due to internal corrosion. Industry can use this information to identify potential risks or threats to their pipeline systems, and the AER also has been able to analyze this information in more detail to identify emerging issues and then educate industry on them if necessary. For example, in 2019, we noticed a significant increase in earth movement-related incidents, specifically due to slope movement. That year, there was significant rainfall throughout the province, and in our experiences, licensees didn't have the risk of unstable slopes identified as a potential threat to their pipeline systems. Although the number of incidents of this nature are very low on a year-to-year basis, this was identified as being a great risk since slopes lead to rivers and liquid releases could then potentially impact water bodies and likely result in a high consequence incident. The AER then released a bulletin to bring awareness to this issue and held an operator awareness session. Additionally, we are in the process of updating the pipeline rule requirements and supporting documents. We have incorporated clearer requirements or additional requirements to address some of the issues we've identified by assessing the data using this tool. Internal corrosion is still the predominant failure mechanism for pipelines that we see, and therefore is an area we have put more emphasis on in the rule rewrite when possible. The rewrite of the pipeline rules is written in a more performance-based way now and less prescriptive. However, in this area, we have more prescriptive requirements to specifically address this issue.
Overall, we kept the visualization very simple and user-friendly. Stakeholders have access to a detailed workbook with additional functionality and raw data to do whatever they want. To support the visualization, it was important for us to provide the necessary background and context for stakeholders. We also included a list of terms and definitions for stakeholders to refer to. Together, all of these things help us to convey pipeline incidents and enable stakeholders to ask questions about the data.
Okay, welcome to Connie and Stephanie. Thanks for agreeing to take some live questions in there. I have to say, first of all, this is a fabulous example of visualization done the right way. Not we had a video on how to do things the wrong way. You guys did it the right way. I'm sure our audience has lots of questions, and I want to allow them to do that. And we're better than to ask people who are doing this in real time. So, speaking of real time, where are you joining us from? Because I see sunshine back there, and
I'm in Calgary, Alberta.
Sunny Calgary, yes.
Yeah, pretty nice day.
Okay, great. Stephanie, if you could just get your mic a little closer, but yeah, just that'd be great. Just do that. That sort of. This would be with the microphone. Good stuff. Okay. So, first of all, did you develop these metrics with the business? How did you evolve these metrics in their presentation?
Connie, you want to take this one?
Sorry, can you just clarify your question a little bit more?
Well, these were so integral to they were so just right on to what the business needed. Were those long discussions? How did you evolve what the views you were going to get?
I think it just kind of happened organically. We kind of knew what we wanted to measure, and we had to figure out what data we had available to us because we are constrained by some of our technology limitations, and then a lot of it too has evolved over time with what industry and stakeholders have also wanted to get out of the data. So we continue to make improvements and adjust as we go along.
Yeah, yeah. And what have been the responses you've seen from this project so far?
Really good, actually. Our inspectors love using it. Industry loves using it to be able to improve their performance and being able to go to their management and get budget allocations to do the things they need by using that stats to back up, what the data is telling us. Some companies that are international, like we have one company that's in Abu Dhabi, like the Crown Prince has
was even using that data and looking at it, and it was a really good support of getting the money that they need to do the things here in Canada, and it's just paid dividends for everyone, I think.
Yeah. Well, when you can turn insight into dollars, you're gonna win friends.
Mm-hmm,
Good
for
stuff.
sure.
Yeah. Stephanie, how about you? What's your perception of how people like this project or thought the results?
I think, like Connie said, we've had really good reception for the report, and as it's evolved over the years, we do track stats in the background, how many people come to our website, read the information, access the full Tableau dashboard here. So the uptake on the website is one of our most popular performance reports, so that's always good to know. And like Connie said, we get really great feedback from different stakeholders, contractors, companies, all sorts of people within Alberta and outside of Alberta that use our information. So really positive.
Qualitative and quantitative data. Good for you, yeah. Okay, how long did it take to develop these? The dashboards, I mean.
Well, I think the majority of the time spent, and Connie, correct me if I'm wrong, was the development of the metrics and cleaning up the data. That was a huge exercise with the business to make sure that we are displaying the information accurately, completely, and telling the right information. In terms of the dashboard itself, we use an application, Tableau, just in-house here at the AER. And creating the dashboard once the data is clean is quite an easy process, especially since we're using quite simple graphs, quite simple visualizations, so that all stakeholders can easily understand the information.
Yeah, part of that I loved was the power of the simplicity in there. Can you share some of the insights you might have gotten from these?
From developing the data
From developing these
visualizations?
dashboards, yeah.
I think less is more for sure. We do want to enable stakeholders to filter and sort and toggle through the information as much as possible. But in terms of showing the important metrics, I think it's important that, it's fairly easy to get to, but if stakeholders are interested in the background data, they certainly have access to our full Excel spreadsheet file as well as the full workbook, which has a lot more functionality as well.
Yeah, and you had the workbooks, the training, I think was important, and the definitions. I thought that was really cool, was making sure you defined the terms and had the workbooks for people. Was that helpful in terms of gaining acceptance?
Connie, you want to answer this one?
Sure.
I guess,
yeah. I would say, yeah, definitely with the stakeholders, because even amongst different regulators throughout the country, we all have different definitions of what we call things. So trying to have people understand what we're calling something was huge, so they know where to bucket it. And even training our staff, because a lot of data we had been collecting over the years, we didn't really have good definitions or business rules for how we were collecting that. So it was kind of garbage in, garbage out. So just tightening up our processes amongst ourselves, and then so industry knows how we're viewing something was huge to be able to have meaningful data.
Yeah, and you've got a lot of data coming in from different sources. Did you struggle with data quality, or is that an issue in a project this big?
Yeah, definitely. We have different sources, but people entering data with different expertise and different at different times. So we're always trying to stay on top of it and vetting that data, and then also giving industry an opportunity to make sure how we have things captured is how they presented it to us, because sometimes the files aren't always getting updated. So we got to make sure we're not missing something, because we also don't want to publish something that goes against what they provided to us and isn't actuality. So there's lots of checks and balances we have to do along the way to make sure the data is as best as we can capture it.
Yeah. And always under a microscope when you're in the public eye with this thing.
For sure.
Yeah. Now that you have the dashboards, where do you go from here? What's your next
It's a
project?
good question. Yes. Well, pipelines is one area that we currently report on. I think I mentioned in the video that we also have performance reports for water and for methane. And so we're always exploring other areas within oil and gas that we can report on. So those are areas that we're looking to work and expand the industry performance program as a whole. In terms of the pipeline performance report, we're always trying to get closer to the root cause. And I don't know, Connie, did you want to comment on that in terms of expanding the report and what we're doing there?
Yeah, so right now we have severe system limitations, so we can only kind of get down to what we call a secondary level of understanding why some of these incidents are occurring. So
Got a system freeze there.
Uh-oh. So what Connie was talking about. Oh, there she is. Can you repeat that? Sorry, Connie.
You froze for a second there.
Oh no.
The world of it's the world of interconnection.
Oh shoot.
You're on mute and you froze. We have those two things going for us.
Yeah, and I've been having some internet
But
issues.
I think you were talking about the system constraints and where you want to go from there. I have to tell you too, for the system constraints you have, this is a fantastic project. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. And hopefully we'll talk to you again more. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Our last case study of the afternoon. Sorry, I just want to continue these discussions, but our last case study of the afternoon, we have to move on to that, demonstrates the power of data, not just in business, but in the community as well. Now, last year, a community group came to the Halifax chapter of the Data for Good organization with a not uncommon problem. You might recognize this one. They did a survey of their members. They collected lots of data, but they had no idea what it told them. Enter a volunteer from a place called Data for Good and the project network lead, Fernando Peña Silva, to explain how the Data for Good chapter helped Hike Nova Scotia find its footing.
Hi, I'm Fernando Peña Silva. I'm the network lead at Data for Good Maritimes chapter. We're very thankful for the organizers of Analytics Unleashed for inviting us. And today I'm going to be talking about this collaboration we have with a nonprofit called Hike Nova Scotia to analyze their survey 2020. Data for Good is a collective of do-gooders who want to use their powers for good and not evil, to help make our communities better through data. We help other non-for-profit and non-governmental organizations harness the power of the data to make more informed and better decisions in their quest to make their communities flourish. Hike Nova Scotia is a non-profit organization that encourages and promotes a growing hiking culture in Nova Scotia. The organization strives to be the voice for those who hike, walk, and snowshoe. With every step, Hike Nova Scotia is building a community of outdoor adventure enthusiasts. With the goal of getting feedback from paid members, Hike Nova Scotia carried out a survey in 2020 to know what members value and expect from their membership subscription. The survey results were sent to 5 Data for Good volunteers who, in the span of about a week, analyzed the data using software of their preference, example Python, Tableau, Excel, R, etc., and came up with their own conclusions. This presentation is a summary of their findings. The survey was sent to us in a flat CSV file. One entry per respondent, or row per respondent, left with a timestamp. This table was mostly complete with very few blanks. Most questions require a yes or no answer, some others multiple choice, and very few open-ended questions. In our experience, this data was not difficult to analyze, and therefore was suited perfectly for a wide range of volunteers, who could be students, professionals, and data enthusiasts. Once the objectives were set in, in agreement with the client and level of difficulty was assessed, we came up with a timeline of about a week from the moment we give this data set to the volunteers, and we agreed for a number of between 5 and 7 volunteers. The call for volunteer was posted across Data for Good social media channels, such as Slack, email lists, and LinkedIn. As an example of the survey and our volunteers' work, here's an example number 1, what we call descriptive analysis, which is basically highlights the entire survey in terms of, how many surveys were sent, how many of those surveys were sent back with responses, etc., etc. One of the volunteers were presented this chart that you see there. Our client just caught the attention of this chart and saw how important it is to send an email reminder. This chart, basically, you see the responder count as a function of date of submission. So the moment that you send that reminder, you're going to get more responses. So it was good for right on the first few slides of this presenter, just to get our client smiling. And my guess is that our volunteer used Python for this analysis. Another example for additional services and activities the members would like. This was an open-ended question, which for analysts, this tend to give us a lot of headaches. Sometimes a lot of people would not respond, would not add any comments on these open-ended questions. Some others, they will write along, maybe an essay. Some others, they will come up with a very short response. So how do you make something out of it? How can you group the questions? And there's pretty much 2 ways. One is the sort of machine learning ways, the way to just count frequencies of words within the responses. And the other one is more when the data set is not that big, you can go and maybe read every answer and come up with a qualitative groupings of these answers. As you see there with a word cloud, you can come up with some of the interests of the member respondents, like trail rating system, guided hike, etc. So as I said, we submitted this survey. Volunteers have about a week. Then we all come together and present in front of the Data for Good lead and the client. And together we come up with some question and some suggestions to enhance future surveys. One of the things we suggest was to send a new survey every year, which will increase the ability to adapt quickly to trend and issues. Maybe you can add questions like rating-like questions, where you would rate from 1 to 5 stars. You could also add inclusivity and accessibility questions, or other questions which, for example, has the trail rating system been an effective initiative? There also came to light that there was another portion of the members who are called the non-paying members, and these members did not get a survey, they did not get polled. So we suggested just to create either include it on the future surveys or create a new survey for the non-paying members. And there you can see some examples of what question you can ask. For example, what would make them become a member? Those questions, these 2 questions that I'm highlighting are related to the survey. But you can also enhance the analysis by including data and include it to the survey analysis. For example, you can use location data, where you can keep track of where the activities have been hosted, or you can also keep track of where your members are located. Postal codes come to mind. Also, you can enhance the survey with event data. So you can, in a different data set, you can come up with what activities have been scheduled, how many people are attending, and correlate your survey results with this event data. Because the last few weeks, we got communicated that we would present it here in Analytics Unleashed. We send an email to the client to get an update of what I've been doing with these results. And here you can see some. They already implemented or are about to implement some of the recommendations, such as membership survey, which is already in plan for winter 2022 to do a revised member survey, and will send different surveys to both paid and free members, whereas before only paid members were surveyed. They also are going to cater to older adults. This was a feedback within the survey. And Hike Nova Scotia NS Walks program is targeting older adults with easier community-based weekly walks run by volunteers. It started this spring. And they're also planning to take the survey results into consideration when starting the process to renew the strategic plan later in the fall and into the winter. Internally, we in Data for Good, we also have some lessons learned. We noticed that we've carried different projects with different nonprofits, and it came to the idea of one of our lead volunteers to maybe come up with a standardized checklist so we can keep track of the entire project. This project checklist will also benefit in new volunteers who may not have that experience. The format is inspiring typical project management checklists found across several industries, so it's nothing extraordinary. But we asked our volunteers to try to stick with it to the max. The whole experience of collaboration between Data for Good and Hike Nova Scotia was enduring and successful. In our experience, there are lots of nonprofits out there that need help in terms of data acquisition, data management, and analytics. Especially this pandemic has presented tremendous challenges for nonprofits, but also opportunities. The fact that there is an increasing population working from home, combined with the social distancing restrictions, have increased the number of people willing to volunteer their time remotely. Regarding data analytics, there's a numerous community out there of people willing to share a helping hand. People with the right skills, such as students, professionals, and data enthusiasts, who, when combined with the access to a diverse set of tools, which many are open source, can bring value to nonprofits' needs. Again, thanks to Analytic Unleashed for inviting us, and thanks to our volunteers. Thank you very much.
Where'd I go? Oh, I'm here. I'm back. Great video. Oh, man. I don't know about you, but I've worn dress shoes for like, I don't know, 2 years. No, I had a few in there. I'm back. And we're just about, we got the workshop to go, and that's about it. So thanks to all of our presenters and participants in the audience who have asked some great questions. We're now going to move into the workshop. Don't leave. This is going to be great. In the workshop, we're going to be able to answer some of your questions from the chat, and we're going to go through some exercises that'll help you not only with measurement issues, but how you can evaluate the effectiveness of an analytics program in there. So to join Doug and me, click on the link that appears on your screen right there. Where my shoes were, just look right under where my shoes were in there. That should be there or on the side, but I think it's under where my shoes are, right down there, okay? You'll end up in the workshop and you can ask on-camera questions and just do it right now, and I'll join you there with my shoes. We can't return to live workshops, but this is a pretty good safe option right now. So anybody out there, you can use the chat and that'll be great. Or if you want to go on camera and just ask a question, that's great too. And if that's, if that doesn't work, we got a bit of a script thing here to talk about, but if, we're going to be guided by what you people want to talk about. That was the point of this, was to make this live and interactive for you. So I'm going to start out with just saying, you can put them in chat or you can just jump in. If there were any questions you didn't ask after the presentations that you've been holding on to in there, and I'll let you guys come into there, but I'm going to, if you don't jump in quickly, I'm going to ask a question of Doug, because I always pick up something new whenever I was going there. And I will. So, but just get your questions in there. But this question of the expected value of information, and maybe that's something you've been talking about for a long time. But the value of information, I saw that graph. The value of information versus the cost, and I just keep getting stuck in this Oscar Wilde quote of, a fool knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. And when I saw that thing, can you talk a little bit more about the value and the cost and how you work with that in real world situations?
Yeah, I mean, in its simplest form, it's very intuitive. The cost of being wrong times the chance of being wrong is approximately the value of information. There's only a few extra twists we have to throw on top of that, because sometimes you're dealing with partial information, and sometimes you can be wrong by a little bit versus wrong by a lot. It's not always discrete. But basically, the value of information is the cost of being wrong times the chance of being wrong. And so the value of information is always within the context of some decisions where you're betting something. You could be wrong about it. I mean, if you think about it, if you had certainty about being right, there's no value to additional information. And if there's literally no consequence to the decision, right or wrong, again, there's no value to the information. So that's something that comes straight from game theory and decision theory. We didn't have to invent that part. But what we did, I think, maybe for the first time in decision analysis, is we applied it to a wide variety of decision models with large numbers of continuous uncertain variables. Like a typical cost benefit analysis for some big initiative, you've seen somebody put together a business case for a big IT project. A bunch of benefits, a bunch of costs, it's all broken down into components. You take this, cost reduction times this last year's cost, and you've got these initial development costs and these long-term maintenance. You've got these growth rates, cost of money, et cetera. You've got all these variables. We've built these models with a couple of dozen variables, maybe a couple of hundred variables, as I mentioned on the video there. And when you run that information value calculation, which is a little bit more complicated when there's a lot of continuous variables, but when you run that information value calculation, you find out that you probably should be measuring different things than what you had been measuring. That's the first finding. And the second one is the fact that something's highly uncertain actually makes it easier to measure. I think that's the counterintuitive part for some people. The more uncertain you are, the bigger uncertainty reduction you get from the first few observations.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. One of the things that just struck home to me, and anybody who's been in a steering committee meeting when you were talking about measuring the things that have the least value are what we measure, and because they're certain, but you can get a tremendous reduction in uncertainty and you don't measure that. That was a big takeaway for me in all of this.
Oh yeah, it absolutely. In fact, one of the most convenient findings here is that the high value variables in a big complex decision are typically highly uncertain. That's why they have a high information value, and they're actually easier to measure because they're uncertain. So that's the handy part. The highest value variables are also going to be easier to measure.
Yeah, been there. We get some questions coming in here. So when measuring murky concepts, how do you assure yourself that you're improving definition, achieving clarity, and not just moving numbers around in there? Ooh.
What was I didn't quite hear the first few words there.
I guess when measuring murky concepts, I guess
murky concepts.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well,
the language on that one, I could tell just without looking at the name.
Well, the best way to work with that is an example. I mean, we run into murky concepts all the time. Somebody would ask me to measure drought resilience. I don't initially know exactly what that means. Or somebody asked me to measure creativity. Initially, I'm not exactly sure what they mean. What are some of the murkiest things I've heard? Strategic alignment. Okay. Organizational flexibility. They actually all do mean something. You just have to articulate what the definitions are. That's the beginning of it. And getting back to that question I asked during the video, what do you see when you see more of it? Identify the observations. That's the key thing. So think of the murkiest concept you can think of. If it's anything that you've ever observed vary in the real world, I say, great. What did you observe when you observed it varying, right?
Yeah.
So somebody just mentioned earlier on here in the chat, when I was first given the session there, they asked about measuring community impact. Okay. I go, well, okay, so what about community impact would you like to measure? Are you talking about maybe the lift in local domestic product of whatever it is you're doing for the community? Are you talking about lives saved? What is it about community impact? I would have a hard time measuring this chair if you didn't specify which attributes you're talking about. What do you want? The weight of the chair, the strength of it, the age of the chair, right? So you have to figure out what about it that you're measuring. So that's the first question about community impact. And then start identifying some examples. What do you see when you see more community impact? If they're interested in measuring it at all, they must believe it varies. So if it varies, what do you see when it varies? What's different?
Are we just afraid of the simple questions sometimes? I mean, I don't mean to make this sound simplistic, but you always make this sound so easy, and yet it's a challenging thing for people? Is that we're just afraid to have those conversations? Why can't we grapple with things on that level?
Well, I think the first part of these questions is the beginning of any scientific inquiry, which is defining the problem better. Okay, so often people start with these very poorly defined problems. I want to measure organizational flexibility. Well, why? And what do you see when you see more of it? And don't forget the why question there, in addition to what do you see when you see more of it. The why question is the decisions it's supposed to support. In all of my books, I'm really writing about decision theory, decision analysis methods, and game theory, et cetera. That's what I'm really writing about, even though I called it How to Measure Anything or the Failure of Risk Management, et cetera. They're all about different decision theory, decision analysis problems. And when you describe why you're interested in measuring something like community impact, is it because you're considering a particular initiative? And it's going to cost you something, and you want to make sure that the cost of that initiative, whatever it is justified by some desirable outcome you want. Great, let's frame it that way. Let's make a decision model for that question, and then it'll clarify what it is we really need to measure in the first place. Often, just defining the decision you're trying to support actually clarifies the decision.
Yeah. Robert, do you want to ask your own question in there? Just come online. Do you want me to ask for you?
I can ask. Thanks, Jim. So Doug, I was just curious about, often we don't have hard data. We are collecting estimates or best judgments or anecdotal information. And I'm just wondering about how you best collect those estimates, whether, employees or managers are the best sources, and how reliable are they overall?
Well, that's something we know quite a lot about, actually. That's the beginning of all of our analysis. When you measure something, implicitly, you had a prior state of uncertainty that was more than it was after the measurement. So you had a prior state of uncertainty, and you took the measurement, and now you had less uncertainty. So the question is, how much was your uncertainty before? Well, research on how well people estimate things goes back many decades. Actually. So the 1970s was really the beginning of a lot of this stuff, and it's been happening almost nonstop since then. And now we found out some really interesting things, that there's some ways of combining the estimates of multiple experts that measurably outperform others. I briefly mentioned that but you don't just, if people give you 3 sets of ranges, upper bounds and lower bounds from 3 different people, you don't just average the lower bounds and average the upper bounds. If 3 different subject matter experts give you the probability of winning some contract, and one says 60%, one says 75, and the other says 80, you don't just average them. There's an algorithm for doing that. Actually, it's building on Bayesian methods. Some of you will know what that is. Bayesian methods are how you can update a prior uncertainty with new information, but it also gives you a way of combining the initial estimates of multiple experts. Well, we usually start with just the client's own identification of who's in a position to estimate those things. So often we'll start with, hey, you told us that those are your project leads, those are the technology leads, et cetera, or the business leads that would know something about that topic. But we don't necessarily take their word for it that they're very good at subjectively assessing probabilities. That's why we take them through calibration training. So we've actually trained over 2,000 people in the last 22 years. And about 85% of people that go through the training, at the end of the training, they're statistically indistinguishable from a bookie at putting odds on things. It only takes about half a day. So most people catch up to it pretty quickly. Once you've done that, you've actually measured something about how good they are at assessing subjective probabilities. And then you start asking them for their inputs on decision models. How much will this project cost? How long will it take? What's the increase in productivity resulting from it? What's the adoption rate going to be the first year, the second year, et cetera? What's the change in revenue or customer retention that you're going to observe? All of those uncertainties. That's just a big cost benefit analysis to us. The primary difference, of course, between that and a conventional cost benefit analysis is that it's not deterministic. There's no exact numbers in there unless you know something exactly. If you know a number exactly, we can use an exact number, but usually they're uncertainties, they're probability distributions. So when we build that first model, we only have 2 sources of data. Either The calibrated estimates of your identified subject matter experts, we've measured their skill. Just like any other measurement instrument, we've calibrated them at their skill at actually assessing subjective probabilities. And the only other data source at that point is what we call arm's reach data. So data you have access to pretty quickly, right? Why not use that? The reason we limit ourselves to arm's reach data at that point is that we don't know what other data we're going to need. We don't want to start out with an assumption that I should spend a bunch of time measuring this and then that, et cetera. We don't know if we even need to measure those things. So we need to capture our current state of data, either our current state of uncertainty, either the arm's reach data or our calibrated estimates. And then we actually do a calculation to see what we should spend more time measuring after that. Then we can conduct the random samples, the control experiments, the regression models, the surveys, et cetera.
One of the things in terms of this calibration, though, Doug, and I just in your book, it gives some quite simple exercises. I walked through them and found that you actually can improve your own calibration in terms of being able to deal with uncertain data as well.
Oh yeah,
about that, and then we'll go on to this other question, because I think that'd be a good preface for this other question that's coming up.
Yeah. First off, it turns out that practice is critical. Just getting feedback on your estimates. You actually make a lot more estimates than you probably remember making or have ever been recorded. You make estimates routinely throughout the day. You're just not systematically tracking them. And you very rarely get feedback on your estimates. I mean, think about a project leader, they're providing estimates for how long a project takes. Well, they won't get feedback on it. If it's a 2-year project, they're not going to get feedback on that until at least 2 years out, whenever it finishes. Then they'll know what the outcome was. In order for our experience to convert into learning, there's been a lot of neat research on this. We need feedback that has 3 attributes. That feedback has to be consistent, meaning almost all the time you need the feedback. It has to be immediate, pretty soon, not a year from now or 2 years from now. And it has to be unambiguous. You can't just say the project was going to be successful, right? It has to be a clear, objective criteria that you're measuring these things by. If you have consistent, immediate, unambiguous feedback, you learn from that. Unfortunately, most professionals don't have that luxury. You don't get that level of feedback. So you have to create, really artificially, that sort of system, that condition. And that's what we're doing. We're asking people to make a series of estimates, and we give them feedback immediately. And another series, feedback immediately. And each time we're teaching them some techniques, like, for example, how to turn every estimate into an example of a type of betting game. Because it turns out that if you pretend to bet money, you're better at assessing probabilities. And actually betting money isn't much better. Just pretending to bet money turns out to be the key thing. So we teach people betting games that you can treat each estimate like.
Yeah, I took a workshop with you before I went into an estimating thing, and I actually handed them out Monopoly money and asked them to bet. And I have to say, it improved that idea of, it sounds fanciful, that it just thinking you're betting money makes you more accurate.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Quite phenomenal. Just in terms of accuracy, one of the techniques, and Yogi, do you want to ask your question in that, in terms of the pooling of results? I think you're talking about there.
Sure, Jim. Doug, as I was thinking about all the concepts you're describing, I thought of what happens in research in what's called meta-analysis. And it strikes me as a very hazardous pursuit, and there are a lot of minefields where you can talk yourself into causation, which is really just spurious correlation. And as I'm listening to you describe the concepts that you talk about, and I wonder if they've been applied to this meta-analysis that seems to be gaining in popularity.
Well, yeah, there is a lot of meta-analysis, because for almost any topic, especially topics that are highly consequential, there have been multiple studies. And so the question is, if I combine these multiple studies, what can I infer from that? Because there can be all sorts of variation within studies, random sampling errors and so forth. But of course, their samples are not homogeneous either. They have different sampling techniques. So there is some technique to putting those things together. Now, of course, I can't speak to every meta-analysis. I'm sure there's flawed meta-analysis out there, but there is some strong mathematical foundation for combining the results of multiple studies. There are definitely correct ways to do that. I'm sure there's the number of incorrect ways, I'm sure, greatly outnumbers the correct ways. But there are plenty of very strong meta-analysis. If you have 6 studies that find a weak relationship between A and B, but all 6 studies were directionally in agreement, the relationship isn't really that weak anymore. You can make several soft relationships between things. And plus, when it comes to causation, this is a tricky part. You might have heard a lot of people say things like correlation is not evidence of causation or something like this. Well, the correct way to say that is that correlation is not proof of causation. But I show a Bayesian proof in the book that shows that correlation really is evidence of causation. If causation is definitely less likely if there isn't correlation. So according to a rule called the law of total probabilities, that means it has to be more likely if there is correlation. So there's really no way around that fundamental formula. It's kind of like conservation of matter kind of formula. It's if one side goes up, the other side has to go down, or vice versa. So it's true that correlation is not proof of causation, but it does have to be evidence of it. Likewise, you might have heard somebody say the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. That actually is wrong. I can prove that. So yes, the absence of evidence is evidence of absence. The fact that you've never observed a ransomware event in your organization does say something about the probability of ransomware. Doesn't make it 0, but it says something about it. There's rules, there's interesting probabilities for that.
Run that by me again. Sorry, I heard every word and I was piecing it together. Just run that by me again. So the fact, start with the ransomware thing. Maybe everybody else got it, but
oh yeah. So I started out by saying you may have heard one of our past Secretary's Defense, Donald Rumsfeld once said, "The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence." Nope. Mathematically, that's incorrect. That's actually incorrect. The absence of evidence really is evidence of absence for the same reason that I was just telling Yogi about. It's the law of total probabilities. If the existence of evidence makes something more likely, the absence of it has to make it less likely. So it is evidence of it. I was talking about ransomware as an example. Yeah. Somebody might say, we've never seen a ransomware event in our organization yet, therefore we have no data about it. That's not really the right way to think of it. The fact that you've observed it, you haven't observed it yet, tells you something about the frequency of it. It's not the same. You can't say that tells us nothing about the frequency of it. I show this kind of standard example called the urn of mystery example I use in my books. The urn of mystery is this giant urn that's filled with red and green marbles, and you don't know what proportion are red. It could be anywhere between 0 and 100% red. The rest are green. You start sampling marbles. The first 8 you sample at random are all green. What's the chance the next one is red? The answer is 10%. Based on the prior I just described. It's based on something called the beta distribution. The mean of the beta distribution is the foundation of something called Laplace's rule of succession. So if you look up Laplace's rule of succession, very simple formula, it's the mean of a beta distribution. And it says that if you just drew 8 marbles in a row that were all green, the next one has a 10% chance of being red.
For our election, Doug, we had a simulation of the results based on a similar the laws, and they actually created an animated thing where you could actually keep drawing things out of different results. Oh, yeah. And I thought about you when I was seeing that. Somebody's got, okay, we've got currently measure what clients are doing. Whose is this? This is Kelly. Do you want to ask it yourself, Kelly? Oh, yeah, you're on mute.
Mike. So we're currently measuring what the clients are doing. What we're really looking is for some behavioral insights. We want to know why they're doing it. Is there a way we can look at the data that might give us insights as to why they're doing it? So, for example, we're maybe segmenting them up. Are single males under the age of 30 tending to do one thing? Are married people over the age of whatever doing this other thing? Because we're looking to see if perhaps there's a way we can provide supports to them in their decision making. So we're a nonprofit. We exist for the best interest of our clients and members. And what we're trying to do is making sure that the people have the information they need at the time of decision. if we're noticing that there's a group who's probably more likely to make a decision that's contrary to their general best interest, we're trying to support them in that. So that's a little bit of context, but I'm not even sure how to frame the like you started off by saying, it's important that you frame your question correctly.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, and what I said, that's a good point. Knowing the decision helps frame the question, actually, is what I was saying. So why do you care about that? And we can get real specific. What allocation of resources or what different choices could you make that would depend on knowing that answer? Imagine if you found out it was, one surprising result versus a very different surprising result. What different actions could you take as a result of knowing why they do something?
The different action we would take was that we would allocate our engagement resources differently in order to target higher probability segments to make sure that they have the information that they need.
And the observed outcome then would be different actions on their part, I imagine, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so what you're basically saying is if I allocate my resources here, I've got one forecasted set of actions. And if I allocate them over here, I've got a different forecasted outcome of actions. The whys, I guess I'm a little bit of a B.F. Skinner on that approach. I don't know if I really care about the why. What I really care about is observable outcomes. Who knows what goes on in other people's heads? What I do know is if I give them this information, they behave this way more often. That's directly observable, right? So the directly observable parts is the motivation might be a mystery forever. Who knows, really? But what you can observe is when I do some things, these other actions are more likely to be outcomes. Well, there's a number of ways to approach that. First off, I'm always telling people there's a pretty good chance it's been measured before, right? So you seem like you might be familiar with a lot of the other psychology research in exactly that kind of problem. There's been quite a lot in terms of basic personality attributes, right? The big 5 personality attributes and so forth. There's a lot of neat research now about how the basic personality attributes can be inferred even from people's Facebook posts and Twitter feeds and so forth. It's called sentiment analysis. There's a lot of interesting research on this. And it's not even really complicated big data predictive analytics stuff. It's really pretty straightforward. If you had let's say a full stack developer who might be not even a full stack developer, but just somebody who's familiar with APIs and screen scraping methods. And some of these modules are available, they're publicly available downloads and so forth. So I just bring in people to do this sort of stuff, but you can do lots of interesting analytics and this is a great source. Social media is a great source for this because the demographics is kind of broken down for you, right? Like people volunteer, their age and their marriage status and all sorts of stuff right on these things. And by the way, you don't have to have all the data to do this. I keep telling this to people all the time, but I hear this from IT people. We don't have all the data for X. Science has never depended on that. It's always based on random samples. When physicists measured the speed of light, they didn't measure all the photons, right? So I'm always telling people, look, if you've got a lot of uncertainty, you don't really need a lot of data points to reduce that uncertainty, right? You could randomly sample, 300 tweets from people in different age groups and do a sentiment analysis, look for the frequency of certain words or terms. Some words are definitely more related to depression or negative feelings, and some are more related to optimism, et cetera. And you can see changes in frequency of those terms. So there's, I guess I'll circle all the way back to the it's been measured before approach, because there's really been quite a lot of work in that space.
Yeah. Believe it or not, we've reached the end of our time. This flew by. And now the end is near. We've reached the end of our time together. I think for an inaugural event, it went pretty well. I think it exceeded my expectations. I hope it did yours as well. We've already started planning for our 2022 version and perhaps some smaller satellite events to keep the conversation going. Use the pre-registration button on the platform and we'll get you set up for next year with a hold-the-date calendar notification. I've got a new book coming out, Data Driven, in the fall. For the first 20 registrations, we'll send you an autographed copy. I hope what you've heard has been beneficial and can help you up your data analytics game. To help you, stories from the conference are available in the ITWC network of publications. You can read these or share them. All the videos and the panels and presentations are on the site here and available for on-demand viewing. And that's it. Thanks to all of you who attended. Thank you to the team at ITWC that made all this possible. Thank you, a special thank you to our sponsors, SAP, Citrix, and Corvell Consulting. And thank you to our supporters, Data for Good, the Canadian Information Processing Society, and the CIO Association of Canada. Please, please, please complete the evaluation form you'll be receiving. It really does help us plan for better events moving forward. And you can reach us with suggestions, comments, or ideas at analytics@itwc.ca. Don't forget to take advantage of that discounted registration to the Corvell Data Analytics for Business webinar with my friend Yogi. And last, details and registration opportunities for the ITWC flagship of events are on the platform. But in particular, I want to highlight our next flagship event, MapleSec. It's a 3-day, hands-on Canadian look at cybersecurity. It runs from October 5th to 7th. It is a registration-only event, but once again, it's free to you thanks to the generosity of our sponsors. Be safe, have a great afternoon, and I hope to see you at a hybrid or a live event soon. I'm Jim Love.